And we are back, everybody. It is Irish breakdown time. We are going to talk about Notre Dame Clemson. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. I want to dive right into it, Ryan, because we are a Notre Dame podcast, but our show today is going to obviously focus on the stacking up matchup between Notre Dame and Clemson. But we're going to begin with a couple unique aspects to this matchup. Number one, I can't believe the disrespect that Clemson is getting right now nationally, and from some people that you and I both know and respect. And then in the chat, perfect example: Archer 452, TCU should be number 4, Michigan 5, Bama 6, Clemson 7. Change my mind. Let me ask you this, Ryan.
Yep.
There's one team that has won 3 games over current ranked top 25 teams. Do you know who that team is? It's a rhetorical question. We both know it's Clemson. I kind of feel like because Clemson's not as good as they've been, that people assume that they're not good. And because they don't have great quarterback play, I get that. Their quarterback play has not been good, but they're very good everywhere else. And I feel like there's a lot of disrespect happening right now with Clemson, and I don't quite understand why, to be completely honest with you. I think they've more than earned the benefit of the doubt with how they've played over the years. But I got to say, I listened to them last night, and I actually listened to someone on ESPN, and I know I shouldn't take ESPN, but I actually usually respect Reese Davis. So it kind of shocked me that he's the one that said it, where he was talking about Michigan should be higher than Clemson. And then he asked, who has Clemson really beat? And I'm like, did you not listen to the rankings you announced, where you went 3 teams in a row that Clemson has played and beat and pretty much controlled the action again in 2 of those 3 games? And then Michigan's got 1 win over a ranked opponent. That's Penn State. Michigan's next best win is what? Maryland?
Yeah.
Right? So I just don't understand the disrespect for Clemson that's happening right now. Is this a Clemson team that looks like 2018 Clemson or 2016-15 Clemson? No. This is a really good football team, and I don't quite understand why people don't get that.
Well, I think you kind of answered it a little bit, Brian, right? It's the fact that they aren't quite as good as they have been, and they have it's the fact that DJ Uiagalelei just looked so bad last game, right? Like, that's in people's minds. It's a recency bias, in my opinion, because if we're comparing it, and this is no pushback to Archer, this is just like a literal conversation, like a legitimate conversation, because I think it's fascinating kind of how people kind of pick sides on this guy, right? Michigan, if you want to say, just from I don't necessarily agree with this, but if you want to say, from the eye test, I just think Michigan's better than Clemson. Okay, I'll hear you. Sure. I don't agree with you, but I'll accept it. Whatever. Cool. They've been good this year.
Because it's subjective, right? That argument is subjective, and I understand that.
But for a ranking, we're talking about a resume, right? The resume, that speaks for itself. Like, you can't argue against the fact that Clemson does have 3 top 25 wins this year. No other team has more top 25 wins than Clemson this year. That is a fact of the conversation. I'm not saying they should be the number 1 team in the country or something like that, but I'm saying that
ranked perfectly. I think 4 is exactly where they should be.
I had 0 issue with where they were. And then it's like, I think Archer said, TCU at 4? What is TCU's big victory, man? Like, I'll
somewhat push back on that, because I do think TCU has a couple victories. In fact, I think you could argue that TCU's resume is even better than Michigan's, but it's not better than Clemson's. TCU does have a good win over Oklahoma State, right? Now, I know Oklahoma State lost to Kansas State, but that was at the end of a really tough 5-game stretch. Oklahoma State also has some good wins. I don't want to dismiss that victory. And they, had to rally back. They showed some toughness. They had a good win over Kansas. I think the Kansas team that we're seeing now is not as good as the Kansas team that they played because of, the quarterback being down. So I don't want to take away from what TCU has done. They had a really nice comeback against Kansas State, right? The week before Kansas State went and beat Oklahoma State. So, I don't want to poo-poo on TCU, but again, it's not as good as, in my opinion, the resume of Clemson. Now, if you want to just talk pure resume, then TCU, in my opinion, should be ranked higher than Michigan. I don't believe in pure resume. I think you have to have some subjectiveness to it, right? But the teams that Michigan has played are just so bad that it's hard for me to really buy an argument that this is actually a good Michigan football team. I have a hard time going there, Ryan. I really do.
Yeah, it's a nuanced conversation, because the reason that I'm leading to those comparisons is that I do think that the pushback against Clemson is unjust. I do. Like, again, am I saying that they are a premier team, an elite college football team? I'm not. I'm also saying, though, that I don't think there's a ton of elite college football teams this year, if we're being honest, right? Like, I think if we look at the landscape, there's a lot of parity this year, in my opinion, at the top. Like, I think there is.
I think there's also a difference between the top three and then everybody else. I do think the top three teams have distanced themselves from everybody else. So I do think there's a gap between Clemson and Georgia this year. I do think there's a gap between, Clemson and Tennessee and Clemson and Ohio State to a degree.
Yep.
So, but there's also Clemson's resume and performance is still better than those teams. I mean, you look at it, Ryan, and I guess the thing that I don't understand is like what I feel is happening. And this is just my opinion. I feel like there's far too many people taking their preconceived notions about strength of conferences into this conversation. That's what I think is happening. I think that people in the Big Ten are just assuming that the Big Ten is still good. The Big Ten's not good this year. It's not. There's too many teams in the conference that aren't as good as we thought they were going to be. Wisconsin's not very good. Iowa's not very good. Penn State's okay. Ohio State's very good. Michigan's very good. This isn't to dismiss Michigan either. I think Michigan's a really good football team this year. And Michigan will have every opportunity in the world to prove themselves worthy of being a playoff team. If they went out, Michigan's we talked about last night, Michigan's one of those teams that right now controls their own destiny. There's no one that can keep Michigan out of the playoff except for Michigan, meaning they don't win their game. So, I do think they're in that type of scenario. But I think the perception is the Big Ten is better than it actually is. People thought Michigan State was going to be really good this year. They're not. They went out of conference, got blasted by Washington State, by Washington. Wisconsin, who everybody thought was going to be a top 25 team, lost at home to Washington State. Like the Pac-12 owned the Big Ten this year in non-conference for the most part. You know what I mean? So, you just kind of look at the overall strength of their schedule and you just have to ask yourself, what are you basing this on? Because here, I'll give you an example. Michigan has played 8 games. Do you know how many teams they have played with a winning record?
2.
That's it.
Got
2.
Okay. There we
That's
go.
it.
Yeah.
Right? And then you look at Clemson, they've played 4, right? So twice as many games against teams that have a winning record. Michigan's played teams that are 2-6, 2-7, 4-5, 6-2, 4-4, 3-5, 6-2, and 3-5. Right? Clemson's played teams, and I only look at FBS teams. I don't count the FCS game to me. But 3-5, 2-6. That was early. Since then, it's 6-2, 6-2, 6-2, 2-6, 5-3. And that's not necessarily in the exact order because I have Florida State lower because I put the 3 6-2 teams together. But their most recent game was over a 6-2 team. So I just don't understand the lack of respect for Clemson, and I don't understand the bad arguments being made for other teams. Right? Like that's the thing is if you want to poo-poo Clemson, then give me some kind of argument as to why they shouldn't be there, other than just I watch them play and I don't think they're that good because the results tell me that they are pretty good. They have almost a 20-point per game difference between their points per game and their points allowed, so, okay, are we going to really rank Michigan's whole season based off what they did to Penn State? Well, what makes us think Penn State's that good? Right? It's a Penn State team that should have lost to Purdue. Yeah, they beat Auburn. Auburn's terrible. They just fired their coach.
Yes.
Right? They struggled to beat Northwestern. They had an ugly win over Northwestern. So my question goes back to why is Penn State considered good?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, they didn't play that great against Central Michigan either, if we're going to be honest. So Penn State has beaten Purdue, Ohio, Auburn, Central Michigan, Northwestern, and Minnesota. Now, the Minnesota win was a very good win. That was a convincing, dominating performance. Minnesota's what? 4-4, 5-3, right? 5-3 with 3 straight losses to Purdue, double-digit losses to Purdue, Illinois, and Penn State. So how good is Minnesota? So, and then there's the perception that the ACC is not as good. Well, has the ACC really lost a big non-conference game other than to Notre Dame? Right? What, Duke at Kansas? Look, Clemson won their non-conference. They weren't really tested out of non-conference yet. NC State smacked Texas Tech, which now looks a lot better. They beat ECU on the road, which now looks a lot better since ECU is a good football team. You look at North Carolina, obviously had a good road win over a quality App State team that went on the road and beat an SEC team. a week later. And so you look at what they've been able to do out of conference, and the ACC has done pretty well out of conference this season. And so it goes back to, Syracuse, for example, beat Purdue. All right. They led Purdue for longer, I believe, than Penn State led Purdue in that game. So, I mean, their margin of victory over Purdue was the same as Penn State's margin of victory over Purdue. So there's just a lot of things I look at, Ryan, and I say, Florida State beating LSU. Right. I mean, Florida State looked a whole lot better in the non-conference than they looked in conference. Why? Because the quality of the league is better. When the SEC dominates out of conference and then gets whipped in conference, say, well, that's just how good the league is. Well, why aren't we saying that about the ACC this year? Wake Forest beat Liberty. And then we look at time like, man, that's a kind of a close, ugly win over Liberty, who lost Malik Willis. Do you know who else Liberty's lost to this year? Nobody. Nobody.
Yep.
So, I mean, you kind of go on and on and on. And Pittsburgh, who is a middle of the road ACC team, 4-4, they took Tennessee, the number one team in the country, to overtime.
They did.
And lost in overtime. So, I mean, those are the things you look at. You say Louisville, who has struggled in conference. Louisville right now is 5-3. Their 3 losses are out of conference. One of their non-conference wins, a road win over UCF, who's ranked in the top 25. So explain to me why people think that the ACC is not better than the Big Ten. The best team in the Big Ten is better than the best team in the ACC. I would say the second best team in the Big Ten is better than the second best team in the ACC. But after that, the depth of the conference is much better. And I think that's where Clemson, to me, is getting disrespected, is because people are still assuming that this league is the same league as it was in the past. And I just don't think that's fair or accurate or, really something that I can hang with this year. And it's based on what these teams did out of conference. That's what I'm basing it off of.
I mean, rankings are all supposed to be about resume, aren't they, Brian? Like, that's what the whole thing is, right? Like, what does your schedule say that you are, right? Like, where are your big wins? Where did they take place? How convincing did you look? All those types of things, right? 3 top 25 wins, like I said. And especially this week, man, I don't want there to be like this preconceived notion out there, or this just belief that Clemson's a bad football team. So if Notre Dame goes and beats Clemson, it's not a quality win. Clemson's not good. Okay, man. All right. Let's just add more fuel to I hate Notre Dame for no reason at all conversation, right? Like, I don't want that to happen this week. I look at Clemson and I say pretty much across the board, they are a much better team than they were last year. Much better team. They're a good football team. They are. They deserve to be where they are ranked. And that's just
right.
That's the baseline for me, is that I felt like it was very fair ranking to start this college football playoff ranking system.
Well, and the thing is, you're seeing Archer's arguments in it, and he's saying like Kansas, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State are all better than any of the teams the ACC beat. Based on what? All right. Okay. Again, I'm going to remind you, NC State played a Big 12 team this year. They smacked that Big 12 team, Texas Tech. Right? Texas Tech looked better in conference in some of their losses than they've looked out of conference in their loss to NC State. Texas Tech is 4-4. They lost by 9 points to Kansas State, 10 points to Oklahoma State in a game they led in the second half, and then this past week they got blown out by Baylor. Their second most convincing loss was to NC State, 27-14, right? I mean, Texas Tech has not scored fewer points against anybody else in the conference. So we've seen NC State, one of the teams that you don't think is any good, beat a Big 12 team that has and Texas Tech beat Texas this year as well.
Yep.
So why should I believe that those are better wins? I mean, Kansas played Duke at home, and that game, and Duke is a middle of the road ACC team, that game went right down to the wire. It was a great game. Duke had their chances to win, didn't get it done, went on the road. I mean, so what are you basing off of that those wins over the Big 12? Why? Because they score more points? Well, that high-scoring Texas Tech team went on the road and played an ACC team that has a really good defense, and they couldn't score.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so.
Well, Brian, I would even take it like this, right? I feel like there's two sides to how people view these things, right? One's the resume, which is where it should be based mostly on. And the other side is the eye test, right? The eye test, which is extremely subjective. My question to everyone out there that disagrees with this, and again, I don't know the answer to this, but I feel very strongly on one side or the other. So this is my opinion, because these rankings are made to decide who is ultimately going to play in the college football playoffs.
Sure.
That's the point of this. If TCU and Clemson were on a neutral site game in a playoff game, who do you think would win?
TCU and Clemson?
TCU and Clemson. Let's just use
I
TCU
go
and
with
Clemson.
Clemson. I think their defense would keep TCU in check, but it's a subjective opinion. I don't know.
Exactly.
But based off of what we've seen,
it is.
right. What we've seen, these Big 12 teams don't score as well when they play out of conference. I mean,
well, it's just from my perspective, Brian, like the two sides of the coin is that I don't think you can justify the opinion based upon the strength of schedule or based upon the resume. And then the other side of it is also just, and this is my opinion, I fully put that out there. In my opinion, also on a neutral site in a big contest, Clemson would also win. So regardless, I just don't see how I formulate an opinion where I would personally put Clemson ahead of, or I would put TCU ahead of Clemson. Like, I just don't get it.
I like what the Big 12 is doing, but let's not act like the Big 12 was juggernauts in their non-conference. And look, Oklahoma State beat Central Michigan by 2 touchdowns in a game that was a 4-quarter game. They had a sloppy win over Arizona State that was competitive for a while. You look at West Virginia, lost at Pittsburgh. So they beat Virginia Tech, right? So that's that's kind of 1-1. Virginia Tech is arguably the worst team in the ACC right now. Kansas has a nice win over Duke. That's a good win. I'll give them that. Right. And then you look at Texas Tech, they lost at NC State by 2 touchdowns. You look at Oklahoma, they played Nebraska, who's a bad Big Ten team, beat them, right? Their other games are UTEP and Kent State. Kansas State's non-conference was against South Dakota, Missouri, good win. And then they lost to Tulane, right? And then TCU's non-conference was over Colorado, Tarleton State, and they had a 8-point win over Southern SMU. So they didn't challenge themselves out of conference at all. And then Alabama or Texas is hanging their hat on what? That they played, that they're going with the Brian Kelly defense, right? Well, but we were competitive. It was a close loss. We lost close more. We lost by fewer points to them than anybody else did. So, what's the big wins that you can look at and say we're hanging our hat on this victory, and that proves that we're better than this other league, or somehow these wins over these teams are better than what they are over other teams. I think it's a lot of this is taking last year's. There's 2 things that people mistake. They're taking previous success of conferences and projecting it onto this year's season. The other thing is taking the assumption that because the best team or 2 in a conference is better, that means the conference as a whole is better. And that's where I think people are wrong. I think the Big Ten is very top heavy this year. And the 2 at the top are very good. Michigan is a very good team. Ohio State is a very good football team. And they have played only 2 competitive games this year, and they have shown to me, like, so I've had people tell me, like, Ohio State shouldn't be there because they had they had to rally late to beat Penn State and Ohio State. I'm like, isn't that what good teams are supposed to do? Like, you're not going to go out there and dominate every team every game, because then people say, well, your schedule is soft. You killed everybody. Like Florida State in 2013, weak schedule. Ohio State has shown that they can win when they're playing great, and they have shown that they can go on the road and not play well over a top 25 team and still find a way to win. Their sloppy win over Penn State was by 13. They showed that they can go toe-to-toe with a talented team like Notre Dame at home, be down, and show the grit that they need to do to win. So I think those things, like, it's like people punish teams for not killing people. This is college football. That's not how this works, right? I mean, Alabama's first undefeated title team, didn't they need like 2 or 3 blocked kicks from Terrence Cody to beat a 7-6 Tennessee team that year? Yep. Right? That's what good teams do, is they find ways to win those ugly games. And I'm not someone that's going to punish teams because of that. But Clemson hasn't had one of those games against a bad team. I mean, their wins, they had a big lead over Wake Forest and gave that up and won in overtime on the road. It's a good win. Yep. They controlled Florida State the entire game. They controlled the NC State action the entire game. Well, Florida State didn't control the entire game. Florida State played well early. And then it was 14-7 Florida State, and then eventually it became 34-14 Clemson, right? Who that team beat basically on a road game, essentially, the number 10 team in the country from the SEC, by the way. I want to remind people of that. Florida State beat LSU and controlled that game for 60 minutes. And then they beat a Syracuse team that's a good football team. I mean, who's Syracuse lost to? Clemson and Notre Dame. That's a good football team. So anyway, the point is this is a good football team. It's all going to get sorted out over the course of the year. But right now, I think that they're just not getting that level of respect that they deserve.
Well, and my last point, Brian, and I would love to hear if you agree with this. I feel like Clemson has been at this level for so long now, right? Until last season, where now that they've taken a step back, it gets super hyperbolic to people to say, oh, they stink now.
Right.
And that's not how that works.
Like
they don't have to go completely in the gutter, man. It could just be they're not quite as good as they were, but they're still good. Like
there's two things in that regard, Ryan, that you're spot on and I think are hurting Clemson. And that is, number one, they're not as good as they've been. Not arguing that. I've been saying that for 2 years. We've been calling their descent, and I think it's only going to continue down. But it's also that people are not giving enough respect to the ACC. The ACC is better now than it was 2-3 years ago. It just is. They've hired better coaches. I mean, even just this last two off seasons alone, right? I mean, you've added Mike Elko to Duke. That's a really good addition, right? I mean, Dave Clawson's done a great job at Wake Forest. You know, Mike Norvell's starting to bring Florida State back from the brink of disaster. You know, you've got coaches that are doing a nice job there. You know, Mario Cristobal just got hired at Miami. You know, you're seeing some new blood over the last few years.
Mac Brown's doing a nice job in North Carolina,
building them back up. Right, he's now into year 4, which means now this team is made up of his recruiting classes. Gene Chizik is doing a nice job of kind of finally getting that defense to be competent, right, with a great offense and a great quarterback. You know, so it's a better league, and Clemson's not as good as they've been. And I think the fact that they're not beating teams 70-6 and 44-10 like they used to, it means, they're not good. They're not as good as they've been, but they're still a really good football team. So anyway, that's my rant for today. And I think it's more about just a lack of respect for the ACC that's based more off what happens in the past than what has actually happened on the field this year. Because again, I'm going to point to those 3 teams deserve to be in the top 25. And the only evidence people have to say they shouldn't be is in conference losses, because all those teams basically got those rankings based off wins they had out of conference. So if it's not an argument that I'm going to find overly convincing. Oh, and I forgot, Syracuse has, smacked Louisville, who's, done some good. It's all circular, right? So I think it's a quality win. And I think the interesting thing is this, and this is what we kind of tie it into the Notre Dame matchup. The fascinating thing is, and the frustrating thing when you look at it from a Notre Dame standpoint is, as I pointed out in the rankings last night, there are only 4 teams in the top 25 that have won 2 or more games against teams currently ranked in the top 25. Notre Dame is also one of those teams. They're not ranked, but Notre Dame has 2 wins over top 25 teams. The only other teams with multiple wins over top 25 teams are Tennessee, who has 2, Clemson has 3, TCU has 2, and Utah has 2. And so the question I asked you today, and I'm very curious to hear what people in the chat think about this. Clemson has been good this year because, unlike past years where they've just been super dominant, because they're not super dominant, they are very consistent. Clemson has been a steady team from the beginning of the year till now. Just, you know who they are. Notre Dame has been this wildly erratic team.
Yep.
I would argue that Notre Dame at their best, Syracuse and North Carolina games, is better than anything Clemson has done this year at their best. The problem for Notre Dame is when they're not at their best, there's a valley there that results in you losing to Marshall and losing to Stanford and not looking great against BYU. By the way, BYU, who beat a Big 12 team this year, by the way. So I just want to point that out again as well for all and again, I like what the Big 12 is doing this year, but I think it's gone a little too far because people are enamored with teams that can score. Right. And we've seen this year after year, the Big 12 has these teams with these high octane offenses. Then they go to bowl games and play teams that actually know how to play defense, and they constantly lose. Right. However, I don't want to get sidetracked again.
Is that an Oklahoma dig?
Not. I mean, Oklahoma State's had that happen to them several times. I mean, it happens to Texas Tech a lot of times. We've seen it happen to them a lot of times. I mean, TCU's had some of these games where they go to these big bowl games and they get rocked because they're playing teams that actually know how to defend you. Yeah. And that it's more of that. I mean, I'm not throwing – I mean, Oklahoma has never had the better team in the playoff of the team. I mean, they weren't as good as LSU.
Sure.
They weren't as good as Bama in 18. So the only game that I felt Oklahoma was the better team was the Georgia game, but it was better by a slight margin. And the game played out like a game between two pretty evenly matched games. It was an overtime game. That was the best Oklahoma team they've had. You know, the 15 Oklahoma team that lost to Clemson, they weren't better than Clemson, in my opinion, that year. So I don't have the hate. Now I think the nature of the loss to LSU was embarrassing.
Yeah,
it was really embarrassing. But I would also argue there was another Big 12 team that year that played LSU and took them down to the wire, and that was Texas that same season. So I don't like getting like one game means that your conference. It's been a consistent thing.
Right.
But that's interesting about Notre Dame is Notre Dame at their best has looked better than Clemson at their best. The problem is we just haven't seen enough of that from Notre Dame, which is why they're 5-3. And I would argue the loss to Clemson or Ohio State they played about as well as Clemson has played in some of their wins, right? When you consider the quality of competition. So the problem is just the downs have been really ugly. What are your thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I agreed with it before we even started. And, this is one of those things where Brian always prefaces by like, you don't have to agree with me. And, sometimes I'd like to be a little adversarial, right? But like, I agreed with this one.
One of the things I love about you.
Yeah, because I started thinking, Brian, I'm like, okay, Notre Dame's best win. You can make a case for North Carolina. You can make a case for Syracuse because obviously they had a more consistent defensive performance against Syracuse, although the offense wasn't quite as good as it was against North Carolina. So either way, you're kind of mixing and matching that one. And then I go, literally, what is Clemson's best victory? And then I know you responded with Florida State. Like you thought that was kind of one. Florida
when we said best is the game that they played the best, not necessarily the best.
Their best performance from a start to finish perspective, like from a product perspective. Yeah. So I mean, because Brian,
the Wake game or the NC State game would be 2 for me. I thought maybe even 1.
The NC State game is really interesting because I didn't think the offense for Clemson looked great, but like they dominated that football game. Like there was no question they were going to win that game, right? Like you were just like, yeah, this is just not – NC State's not going to be able to score enough. Like that was just kind of my vibe the entire game. But I mean, you've seen a mixed bag from a game-to-game perspective. Like you think back to the Wake Forest game, right? It's like, wow, DJ has – one of his better games of his career, maybe his best. I mean, he looked very good in that football game, but then you're also like, but the Clemson defense looked very human in that football game, right? Like, I feel like there hasn't really been a game this year where Clemson has been at their peak, both offensively and defensively in the same game. Like, I think it's been very mixed bag.
That's also one of the knocks that people have on Clemson is because they don't have that one just wow game. And I hope it's not this weekend.
Sure, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. But it's been peaks and valleys. I mean, especially offensively for Clemson. Well, actually, both sides of the ball. Now I think about it, because I was going to say, like, DJ and the offense is playing pretty well some weeks. They didn't look great against Georgia Tech. They obviously didn't look great this past week. In their or the last game they played against Syracuse, obviously, where they had to kind of rally back at the ends and had to take DJ out and all that type of stuff. So the offense has been very up and down, but the defense has been up and down too, which is the more troubling part, I think, for Clemson, because Clemson has kind of been built upon a great defense.
Did you say they've been up and down, or just not as good as we thought they've been? Because what's the down game? I think they've had one bad half of football defensively, in my opinion.
I think early on. Yeah, I think early on in the season, they've had their struggles from a pass coverage perspective. Like, I think that their secondary is not nearly as good this year. I agree, and I know we talked about this yesterday before the technical issues. I do think that now Clemson's secondary is playing better, but even in that Wake Forest game, I was like, Wake Forest really took over that game in the second half, or not took over, but got back into that game because they were also dominating at the line of scrimmage. Like, they couldn't stop the run in the secend half either.
I think it's fair. I think it's fair to say that they took over the second half, Ryan. I mean, I think that's. I mean, look, it was a 17-7 game at one point in time, and they just couldn't. Offensively, they took over in the second half of that game. But then that's also here's the thing I liked about what Clemson did that game though, is Clemson's offense, which has struggled, made the plays they needed to make to get back in that game and win the game. I mean, Wake Forest twice took a lead in the second half, and the offense responded. Yeah. Right. And so that's the interesting thing is, depending on which version of Notre Dame shows up, I don't think that Notre Dame, this should be considered a huge upset from this team's best versus that team's best is the point. And I think that's the knock on Clemson. I think that's the one somewhat valid criticism that you can make against Clemson. But my counter to that is, but that's also partly because they've played better teams than a team like Michigan. Like how would Clemson's first 3 games have looked if instead of playing Georgia Tech, who's a not very good, but still a Power 5 team that's had some good wins this year, how would they look if their first game was against Hawaii,
right,
or
exactly.
UConn, or I mean that's kind of where I come from. Like with the Michigan angle is, it's easy to look good when you're playing teams like Michigan has played. I mean, literally, Michigan played 3 of the 5 worst teams in college football, in my opinion. Although UConn's playing better. Jim Moore has got them. I got to stop saying Jim Moore Jr. because he's not junior. But the Jim Moore's got them playing better football. But early in the year, they were bad. But they played Hawaii, Connecticut, Colorado State. The first time they played a decent team, they played Maryland. They won by a touchdown and didn't look great in that game. The next week against Iowa, they didn't look great against Iowa. And then after that, they played a bad Indiana team. And look, they didn't look very good against Michigan State either. Michigan State just stinks. I mean, Michigan State's Keon Coleman was just mossing dudes the first half of that game. Michigan State's terrible, right? So, yeah, you're going to look better when you're playing bad teams consistently, and that's where I'd say, Clemson, like I said, Clemson's played twice as many teams with a winning record as Penn State has. And that matters. That matters. It's going to factor into how good you actually look as a football team.
For sure.
So Ryan, I think it's kind of, I think we made our point. It's just it makes for a really intriguing matchup, and it's something. The reason we wanted to kind of discuss that last part is because it really factors into. Sorry, the shadow on this shirt looks really jacked up. So the thing that I wanted to talk about is the fact that when you look at this football game, the stats are going to tell you a story, but the stats are interesting because teams are playing better at different times, number one. And then number two, it depends on which version of this team shows up. And that's going to make it very interesting as we dive into this. So, Ryan, I want to jump into the stacking up portion of the show. And this is going to be fun. We're going to work through this. These are some of the interesting aspects of this. We're going to start off with the Notre Dame rush offense against the Clemson rush defense. And this is one of the more fascinating statistical matchups of this game, Ryan, because on paper, this is a huge Clemson advantage. And in every possible way that no matter what level of context you provide here, Ryan, Clemson's going to have the advantage. The point, however, is that if you look at Notre Dame from a what have they done in the last 5 games standpoint, so I like to try to use context a little bit greater detail as opposed to just like, oh, well, the last 2 games, I don't think that always is necessarily indicative of you're actually better than you've been. But if you look at Notre Dame, the last 5 games, Notre Dame has rushed for they've averaged 228 rushing yards per game over the last 5 games. Now that right now, if you projected that out over the course of the entire season, that would put them 5th in the country or 10th in the country, excuse me, in yards per game, and they would rank 32nd in yards per attempt. Now, if you look at Clemson, they've played one team that ranks in the top 40 in rushing offense. That was Florida State. Florida State rushed for 206 yards against Clemson. And Ryan, if you look at that game and break it down, Florida State had 139 yards in the first half. Now, the reason that they didn't rush for as many yards in the second half, they only rushed for 67 yards in the second half, but they only ran it 11 times because they were down 24-14 at the half, and then Clemson scored on Will Shipley returned a kick. Remember that? He returned the opening kickoff back far, and then they scored on the very next play. Next thing you know, it's 31-14. It took Florida State out of their game. Then they went back to running the ball in the fourth quarter because it got closer, and they had more success again. and I think they had like 40 some yards in the fourth quarter of that battle. So that's the only top 40. Excuse me. That's the only top 40. Let me see this. I don't know what just happened there to my stuff. Where did it go?
We're about to watch a YouTube video.
I know, right? I gotta pull this back up. I don't know where they went. So when you get back to it, Ryan, it makes this matchup. What makes this matchup really interesting is the fact that you do have a situation where Notre Dame recently has been much better, and part of Clemson's success is that they have not really played good rushing teams. How much of that factors into their ranking? That's what makes this matchup to me more competitive than it would otherwise look on paper, because you're talking about Notre Dame ranking 39th in rushing yards, 56th in yards per attempt, where Clemson ranks 7th and 11th in those two categories.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at, Brian, where Notre Dame has made their money and where Clemson makes their money, right, from an offensive and defensive perspective, respectively, this is how Notre Dame needs to win football games, and this is how Clemson also needs to win football games, right? Like Notre Dame is built upon running the football, being effective in that area, because you look at their offensive line has obviously been playing at a very high level over the last 5 or so games. Their running backs have been playing at a very high level, Logan Diggs and Audric Estime especially. And then defensively, I mean, we knew this going into the year, right? Clemson has dudes on the defensive line. Like, there's no doubt. Miles Murphy, Brian Bresee, when he's healthy. You have Tyler Davis, who's back and playing good football. You have Xavier Thomas, who's backing up KJ Henry, who KJ Henry's also no slouch either, right? Like, he's a good football player, former 5-star recruit who's turned himself into a good contributor for Clemson. So the defensive line's excellent. And even the backup D tackle, Rook, however you pronounce his last name, is a pretty good football player as well.
Row is like, literally, if you look at the pronunciation guide for Clemson, that's exactly what it looks like. It's quite strange.
Yeah.
All right, so we can pull this back up. We're good to go again.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, the defensive line, you knew all those names, right, going into the season. You knew they were excellent. Right. And then I think that the linebackers, I mean, I feel like we have talked about them a lot, but there's a couple that we haven't talked about enough, because we didn't know Barrett Carter would be this guy, right? Like, going into the year, you were like, it could be him. It could be a couple other linebackers to kind of step up and take that spot. Barrett Carter turned himself into a heck of a football player on top of Trenton Simpson.
Can I ask you a question, Ryan, about that?
Yeah.
If I were to make this statement to you, would you tell me that I'm full of it, or close, or correct?
Okay.
So far, through 8 games, the best linebacker for Clemson has been Barrett Carter, not Trenton Simpson.
Most impactful, I would agree with 100%. I mean, it's funny because he's playing the role in their defense that kind of, that hybrid safety linebacker, whatever you want to call it, whatever they call them in their system. They're a rover. That was what Trenton Simpson was playing last year, and obviously he excelled in that role. He moves to weak side linebacker this year. Barrett Carter gets inserted, and I don't know what it is about that position in their defense, Brian, when you think about what Isaiah Simmons was, when you think about Mike Jones was when he was healthy at Clemson before he transferred to LSU, and now you think about what Barrett Carter is. That's their playmaking position on this defense. So I would agree. I mean, most impactful for sure. He has been kind of an eye-opening dude, because, like, I knew Trenton Simpson was good going into the year, right? You knew that
he still is good. He still is good. He just hasn't been
not as impactful this year as he was last year. I would, 100%. Because I expected whoever the Mike linebacker would be, whether it was Jeremiah Trotter Jr., who obviously is the guy now, or Andrew McGuire, or whoever, like, they would be solid at that, or Keith McGuire, excuse me. They would be solid at that other linebacker spot. But that rover spot, whatever they call that spot in their defense, Barrett Carter has been an eye-opener this year. So they are fast, explosive on the second level, and they have a defensive line to back it up. So for Notre Dame to be successful, they need to be able to run the football. It's going to be a challenge, but Notre Dame has the guys that I think that they can be successful in that department. I do.
And I fully expect him to play a lot closer to the line of scrimmage in this game than he has in a lot of other games. That's absolutely something I expect to see in this game. So, and then, of course, like you said, up the middle, they're very good up the middle. They're very good on the edge.
Yep.
Notre Dame's going to have to be on top of their game. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The reality is, though, is Notre Dame is good on the offensive line. Their run game is good. I don't think it's good enough for them to win this game by only running the football. They're going to have some help in some other areas. But can they have some success in the run game? That's going to be a key. If Notre Dame's offensive line doesn't play really well in this game, it's going to be hard for me to see Notre Dame winning, barring just Drew Pine playing out of his mind and the Notre Dame defense forcing multiple turnovers. To me, that's the only way that they're going to be able to win this football game.
And I also think that in order for Notre Dame to be good at running the football in this game, it can't be what our struggle with the team has been over the last few games. Like it seems like at times they're just like, we're just going to run duo at this team and just overpower them. Like you're not going to win against Clemson like that, right? No. Like you have to be more diverse in the running game.
Not because of your offense. It would have to be, Ryan, because your defense forces like 4 turnovers or something like that. That's the only way you're going to be able to do it. And
there's a couple.
What we're saying is you're not going to win because of your offense.
Right.
If that's what you're doing.
Yep. There's a couple NFL teams that if they just ran the basic same thing every stretch against Clemson's front seven, they wouldn't be overly successful. Like that's my thing. It's like you can't be predictable against this front seven. And, again, I know we call for this every week and it just doesn't happen, Brian, but if there's a week to pull out some RPOs, man, this might be the week, but that's a conversation for another time, I guess, unfortunately.
Yeah. So let's go to the next part of this matchup, Ryan, and this is the interesting part of it. It is the Notre Dame pass game. Of course, now I'll tell you what, man, I am having a heck of a time today with this. Okay, now we got it back up. Let's go to the Notre Dame pass game against the Clemson pass defense. Now, the run game matchup is strength on strength. The pass game matchup is weakness on weakness. However, they're headed in 2 different directions. Yes. That's the concerning part of this matchup for Notre Dame, is they're headed in 2 completely different directions. Whereas when Drew Pine was first inserted into the starting lineup, Notre Dame's pass game had 2 really good games in a row against North Carolina and BYU in convincing victories. In the last 3 games, however, Notre Dame has averaged 5.6, 7.3, that was against UNLV, and 6.1 yards per attempt, and Drew Pine is completing less than 50% of his passes. In Clemson's last 3 games, defensively, last 4 games actually, they've held opponents to 5.1, 5.2, 6.0, and 6.4 yards per attempt. Now, none of those teams are very good at throwing the football.
Right.
But they've still done what you need to do. And so you had and then you've allowed teams to complete over 50% of their passes, well over 50%, but not for high yardage and yards per play. So Clemson has gotten better. The question that we're going to find out is, can Notre Dame do things to actually finally get their skill players involved in the game? Because I don't think you can beat Clemson because of your offense if you're not able to have success throwing the football. Notre Dame has the players that can give Clemson problems. The question is, will they use them or not? That's the question. And the receivers played a huge role in the win in 2020. And Javon McKinley, they could not cover him. You wish that Notre Dame would have gone to him maybe a little bit more, but they could not cover him. Avery Davis has the huge play at the end of the game. This isn't even as good of a secondary as that was, in my opinion. So there's opportunities to be there, because the one thing Notre Dame can do, at least on paper and based on recent games, that the teams that they played in the last 4 or 5 games could not do, is protect the quarterback.
Yeah.
Could not. Clemson, I think, had 14 sacks in the last 4 games. Notre Dame's done a great job of giving Drew Pine time to throw. That's going to make – we're going to talk about the perimeter matchup, but the more entertaining matchup, if I'm an NFL team, the matchup I'm spending most of my time on in this game is I'm watching the matchup of Joe Walton, Blake Fisher against Miles Murphy, KJ Henry, Xavier Thomas, and Justin Maskell. That's the matchup that I'm looking at in this game. That's going to have a big impact on the pass game, in my opinion.
It's a money game. It's another money game, right? Not as much for the offensive tackles because they're only sophomores, so we still have to wait another year before really taking them seriously as NFL draft prospects. But for a Miles Murphy, for a Xavier Thomas, for a KJ Henry, this is a money game, man. Like this NFL scouts know that Notre Dame's got a couple dudes at offensive tackle. They know. And for Notre Dame's sake, they need to play well in that department, because that is the strength versus strength in this matchup right here, is that Notre Dame is a very good pass blocking team, and Clemson has some dudes up front that can cause issues. That's not even counting the fact that you're going to see Barrett Carter probably blitz off the slot a little bit. You're going to see Trenton Simpson and those guys blitz from different spots on the second level. Like, you're going to see that, right? They're going to try to create pressure. But Brian, I mean, to my point, last week heading into the football game, on paper, Syracuse had a huge matchup from a pass coverage perspective versus Notre Dame's passing game. Now, obviously, Notre Dame did not have a very good game passing the football. But I would argue if you watch the game, there were guys open. There were opportunities out there.
I mean, you were there. You saw what I've been saying all year, and you've now seen it at 2 games because you were at the Marshall game as well.
Yep.
There are guys open. It's just 100%. The ball's got to get delivered. Yep. And I think that's the only reason that there's optimism is like, you just hope that this is the game where the light goes on, at least for this game for Drew Pine. And he doesn't necessarily need you. Look, you can beat Navy and Boston College playing the way you did the last 3 weeks, a couple games throwing the football. You can. Yep. But you can't beat Clemson. You can't beat USC that way. So you just kind of hope that this is the game that Drew sees it and hits it because there will be open guys. There will be. You're going to need a quality game plan. But my concern in this matchup from a pass game standpoint and a run game standpoint, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow, is if Notre Dame tries to go with their condensed boxes and trying to run out of 12 and 13 personnel, I think that plays into Syracuse's hands, not just in the run game, but also the pass game. Right. Because I don't think Notre Dame necessarily has the overall speed to condense and outrun them. You know what I mean? From that, I think they need to get them in space more. If you get them in space more, I think there's opportunities to be had. But we'll find out if they're willing to do that or not. Because their safeties, I would say their safeties are actually, I think, a little bit better than they were a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. I think Jalen Phillips is a really good run defender. Makuba's a solid football player. Their corners still aren't very good. And I would argue not even as good as they were a couple years ago. So that's going to be an issue. And look, anytime I get Toriano Pride matched up on Tobias Merriweather or Deion Colsey, and you're not throwing the football down the field on him, you're making a mistake. Right. I mean, that's what good teams do, right? And what did every good team that we've seen this year that plays Notre Dame do the minute Jaden Mickey gets on the field? They run some kind of double move on him. Yep. Right. Yep. That's what good teams do. Hey, Toriano Pride's in the game. Guess what he doesn't do well? Cover down the field against bigger receivers. We've got bigger guys in the field. Let's take a shot. So I think there's opportunities to be had, but at the end of the day, you got to protect the quarterback, and Drew Pine's got to get the ball where it's got to go. I mean, that's going to be the key. That's going to be the key.
This is the difference in the football game, in my opinion. Like, this is the one right here. Like, I think that Notre Dame has every opportunity to win this football game if they're effective passing the football. If they're not, I think they could still stay in the football game, but that, I think, could be the difference between winning and losing a football game. Like, I think that this is what we're looking at right here. Because, again, not putting all the blame on Drew Pine. It's not all Drew Pine. But last week, again, there's a lot of guys open, man. He had some pretty good time to throw the football last week. Like, there was a lot that I think Drew was self-inflicted last week. And I think that both on the post-game show that you guys did and the Upon Further Review show, Brian, Vince said something where, and I agree with it, you don't need Drew Pine to be North Carolina Drew Pine, right? But you also can't let him be the last 3-game Drew Pine either, right? Like, at some point, those two guys need to meet, and it needs to be a more consistent player, because you don't need Drew Pine to be a 300-yard passer this week, to be a star, to beat Clemson. You need him to be a efficient, good passer, though. Like, you need that threat to be there. And if it's not, Notre Dame's going to struggle offensively. But I think that they have a chance to take advantage of Clemson in the pass game, because again, to your point, I don't think that the Clemson secondary is as good as it has been in years past.
Ryan, I think this matchup too is going to be interesting because Notre Dame is going to need some big plays in the pass game, in my opinion. They don't need 10 of them, but they're going to need a couple. And I think one of the things that I would do if I'm Tommy Rees is you got to try to find a way to generate that early. Yeah. So we'll see if they're able to do that. But we'll get more into that tomorrow when we go into the pass game, or the keys to victory, which we'll do tomorrow. Let's look at the scoring offense against the scoring defense. Ryan, we'll just spend a few minutes on this one. Obviously, a lot of these metrics are very similar, Ryan. Red zone offense and red zone defense are in the same wheelhouse. Clemson is slightly better when it comes to touchdowns. Third down offense and defense is almost identical. Notre Dame has a slightly higher ranked limiting turnovers compared to Clemson forcing turnovers. Clemson doesn't force a lot of turnovers. Where you get into the huge differences is Notre Dame just doesn't move the ball and score, and Clemson doesn't let anyone move the ball and score at a great rate. Now, I would argue that their defense this year is not as good as I thought it would be. I thought they'd be top 10 in these areas, especially points. but I think their offense has been a little bit better. They have allowed some late points, I think, at times that they're, because they're very young. Their depth is very young on defense on the back seven, which is kind of factored into that. But I think you also have that one overtime game against Wake Forest that kind of pads those numbers a little bit as well. Do you remember what the score was, Ryan?
51-45
No.
was the
I
final.
remember what the final was. I was curious
Yeah.
what it was at the end of regulation. Would they score 13? So it would have been 38-38, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, when you look at it, I think that drops them down a little bit, not a ton. But Clemson hasn't let a whole lot of other teams score a lot. What they've done is they've allowed some cheap scores. Florida State scored twice in the fourth quarter to turn a 34-14 rout into a much more close than you'd think, than it looked 34-28 game. You've given up some late points to other teams as well. But if you take away, the overtime game against Wake Forest, their average drops down to 18.3. And so, it puts them a little bit higher in the rankings. That would drop them up. That would rank them up to 19th. So it's a couple spots. It's not a lot, but that's the thing is they're not as good. They're not as dominant on defense this year as I thought they would be, but they're still a pretty good defense, especially again when you put into context that half of their opponents have had winning records, and half of their opponents this year have been ranked at some point in time during the season.
Right.
I think that factors in as well to their level of success.
And I think that we may have I don't think we underestimated it, but I think some people may have underestimated the fact that, like, hey, there was a lot of talent coming back for Clemson, but you did lose Brent Venables, right? Like, who was obviously a great defensive coordinator. And Wes Goodwin might end up being that guy. I mean, it's looked better the last couple of games, Brian, but like, it's obvious. It's an obvious downgrade right now. Like it is. Yeah. It's an obvious downgrade.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not in love with what I've seen from him so far. But of course, I don't love what Notre Dame does offensively either. So it really doesn't. It doesn't really play out a whole lot better in that regard. But that's the matchup between those two teams, Ryan. I do think this bottom one is going to be a big part of this game. I do think this is going to factor in. Notre Dame hasn't turned it over a lot. Clemson doesn't force a lot of turnovers. For Notre Dame, that's got to hold true. I think that especially lately, I mean, Notre Dame's had they have a bad turnover a game. You got to try to avoid that, but they haven't been a high volume turnover team this year, at least not lately, in my opinion. They had 3 against Marshall. You had 2 against Stanford. You've got to avoid those. You've got to avoid those turnovers. Those type of turnovers is what you've got to avoid if you're going to have success. I mean, what helped them against Ohio State? No turnovers. They didn't give Ohio State any short fields. Ohio State had to earn all their points. That's the thing that's going to be key in this game as well. Is you've got to limit turnovers. Don't put your own defense in some bad spots, because these two teams are very evenly matched in a lot of ways. They're very similar. Not great quarterback play. They want to run the football. Good playmakers, but haven't been given as many opportunities because of the quarterback play. Notre Dame's got a better line. Clemson's receiving core has been better than Notre Dame's, right? So it balances. Defensively, they're on similar things. Not as good as we thought, but still pretty good. That kind of thing. Keeping teams down. You haven't been dominant on defense, but you've also kind of played well enough to win every game. Ball control teams. These two teams are very similar in how they're currently structured. And so it's going to be things like that for the Notre Dame offense, of not giving the Clemson offense a short field, is going to be key to the game. And we'll say the same thing on the other side of the ball is for the Notre Dame defense, giving your own offense short fields is going to be key in this matchup. So I do have my eye on that as a big part of this game. And we don't always talk about turnovers in games, Ryan, because it's usually a given. Yeah. But in a game where I do think it's pretty evenly matched, I think it needs to be noted of just how big that part of the game could be.
Well, and it's broken record time for me, Brian. I'm going to say something that I say every single week, and I'm okay with it because it's important. Notre Dame is playing a really good football team this week, right? A good football team. Don't hurt yourself. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. Like, we've seen that, man, in some of these games where you're just like a dumb turnover, a mistimed penalty, a bad punt, whatever it is. Like, there's just self-inflicted things that Notre Dame has done this year where in a game that is this type of game, that'll be this atmosphere against a top 5 team in the country, you can't fight against yourself, man. Go play Clemson. That's the only team you have to play on Saturday. It's the only one. And if you do, and you keep it clean and you just play a good football game, I believe Notre Dame will have a chance to win. But to your point, no self-inflicted things, no dumb turnovers, no timely mistakes. Like, those things are going to be the difference in this game, in my opinion.
And when you do get those 4 or 5 opportunities for a big play, you've got to hit them.
Yes.
And you can get away with missing those against Syracuse because you're just way better than they are. You're not way better than Clemson. You need to take advantage of those opportunities.
No doubt.
Let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball, Ryan. This is a very interesting matchup as well. You have the Notre Dame rush defense against the Clemson rush offense. Very evenly matched statistically. Now, the interesting thing is you take into account quality of the teams they've played. Notre Dame has played some good rushing offenses and some teams that aren't great at rushing the football. Clemson hasn't played a lot of really good rushing defenses so far this season. So you kind of look at it and say, "Boy, it's going to be a little bit of an interesting battle here between these two teams." Two units that I think have underachieved a little bit this year. Clemson has a big offensive line. I wouldn't necessarily call them overly physical, Ryan, but they're big.
Yeah, they're very big.
Talented backs and a quarterback that can run. Now, I think they try to make him something he isn't as a runner. Talking about DJ, but he's still a good athlete. And he can hurt you, as NC State found out in the third quarter of that game. He can hurt you if you're not disciplined. And Notre Dame's rush defense has been a little bit erratic. I'll say this, Ryan, no unit on this football team better, kind of shows, I say how symbolizes what this season has been, right? Than the Notre Dame rush defense. The Notre Dame rush defense is like the perfect symbol to show who Notre Dame has been this year. When they have been good, they have been really, really good. I mean, they shut down in North Carolina a rushing attack that's averaging over 200 yards a game. They held them to 66. Actually, hold on a second. North Carolina's rush offense has actually gone down a little bit in recent games, but they held them to 66 yards, which is their season low so far, by far. Held them to 2.4 yards a carry, also their season low. They were coming in that game averaging over 200. They obviously did shut down Stanford's run game, allowed 97 yards on 42 carries, shut down a quality Syracuse ground attack. Syracuse was held to 125 yards by Clemson's really good rush defense. Notre Dame held them to 61. If you doubled up what Clemson did against Notre Dame, they still don't get to what they did against Syracuse.
And that 61 included a 21-yard run in the first drive of the game as well.
Outside zone backside cutback, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And also had several scrambles in the second half from from Del Rio Wilson, who right before the interception by Maris Luafau had two straight scrambles for 15 yards. So, and then of course there's they did a great job against Cal. Cal had 112 yards. It's probably a third of that was scrambles. But then you have the UNLV game where you only give up 146 yards, which isn't great, but 70 of, I'd say over 100 of that came on 2 carries. You give up 219 to Marshall. Ohio State goes for 172, but a chunk of that was in the second half. And then, then the BYU game, your overall numbers aren't good because you gave up 164 yards and 5.7, but then you watch, you're like, they had like 4 runs. It's been and what does that all come down to? Wildly inconsistent, dominant at times and bad at other times. And it is a perfect encapsulation of what this season has been for the Notre Dame as a team. And so in this game, Ryan, it's going to be a huge part of the matchup because if Clemson can run the ball on Notre Dame's going to have a hard time stopping Clemson because it opens up their RPO game. It opens up their screen game. It opens up their vertical passing game. That is all built on their ability to establish the running game to some degree. And so it's going to, which version of the Notre Dame run defense shows up? Because Clemson's rushing offense, Ryan, in my opinion, has not been great this year, They have the really good performance against Syracuse, which is a very strong performance. A lot of the second half. They have just been steady. They're not great. 119 against Georgia Tech, 147 against Furman, 188 against Wake, 145 against NC State, 144 against BC, 167 against Florida State. And then the two anomalies are 280 against Louisiana Tech and 293 against Syracuse. Right. So you've got to make them look more like the team they were against NC State and Furman and Boston College and Florida State than the team that was there against Louisiana Tech and Syracuse. Big part of this game.
Well, I think what's fresh in your mind too, Brian, is that from a Notre Dame perspective, you saw last week when Notre Dame has good linebacker play, they're a pretty good rush defense, man. They are. I mean, J.D. Bertrand played his best game of the season, bar none, last week. Maris Loifel stacked back-to-back pretty solid football games in a row. The linebackers have been playing. Jack Kaiser had a couple nice splash plays in that football game. Like, the linebackers played exceptionally well last week, and you held what we talked about was a good rushing offense of Syracuse to 61 yards. Like, you showed in that football game on the road that you have the ability to be a very good run defense when everything is right, when you are disciplined and you do your job. You don't try to do too much. You just do what you are asked to do. Now, against a Clemson team, we know what they want to do. We know what they want to establish. Will Shipley's their guy offensively from a skill position perspective. Like, that's their dude. They want him to touch the football. They want him to get downhill. They want him to explode. And he has a lot of things that you really like. And then they bring in Phil Maffa, who's a 230-pound running back, who's a little bit of a hammer too, right? So they have a good mixture of ability to run the football. It's been inconsistent because I still don't think, even though I would say that Clemson's offensive line is definitely better than last year, like no doubt, still not a great offensive line. It's okay. They're okay. They're not a bad unit this year, in my opinion. But that is, it's going to be interesting because I agree. Notre Dame has been very peaks and valleys as far as a rush defense. But when they've been good, they've been really, really good. I mean, last week was a tremendous performance. I'm going to be watching that second level all day. If their second level plays well and their defensive line continues to kind of be what we've seen them in recent games, then they have an opportunity to make this offense a little bit one-dimensional. If you make this offense one-dimensional, that's how you beat Clemson. Because they, to your point,
right.
RPO game, play action game, quarterback run game off of it as well. They want to live off of being able to establish a run game, and everything kind of works off of that. So that's the key, man. That is the absolute key. And I think it starts usually with the defensive line, but I would say it starts really with what linebackers are you going to get in this game? What type of player are you going to get? Right. I think that really matters in this game.
Because we thought the UNLV game was probably their best performance of the season outside of 2 or 3 plays, right? Syracuse game then topped that. But what was the best game prior to that from the linebackers? It was North Carolina, at least against the run. We thought they were very good against North Carolina against the run. And that was Maris' only good game of the year up until UNLV was that game. And so to your point, Ryan, when the linebackers have played well, for the most part, they can shut down teams that run the football. And not just, hold them to 110. I mean, hold them in the 60s. They held 2 good rushing attacks in the 60s, ACC rushing attacks in the 60s. So I think that's a big part of what they're doing, and it's going to make this huge because of Will Shipley and Phil Maffa can and I love that hammer. Maffa's the hammer, and then they'll use them together, and as we talked about yesterday, so it makes it a very intriguing aspect of this game. Let's move on to the matchup of the Notre Dame pass defense against the Clemson pass offense. And this is an area, Ryan, that I think Notre Dame holds a significant advantage outside of the turnover aspect of it, which then plays into the pass efficiency defense. Notre Dame's pass defense is one of the most underrated parts of this team. I don't think fans appreciate how good the pass defense has been this year. There's been about 5 or 6 plays that frustrate you. The big pass against 2 big passes against Ohio State. You had the 2 late big plays you gave up to North Carolina. But outside of that, the Notre Dame pass defense has been pretty good this year, especially when you consider the quality of the opposition. They held Ohio State way below their season average in passing offense. They held North Carolina way below their average in passing offense, and that includes giving up garbage plays at the end of the game. They give up like a 60-something yard touchdown with 30 seconds left in the game, right? And on a 4th and 20-something where they just blew a coverage. that's a little bit of a different deal. But I think that their overall production this year in the pass game has been pretty good. It really has been. It hasn't been great. It's been inconsistent like the rest of the football team has been this year. But I think this has been an underrated part of their offense, and this is an area where Clemson has struggled. Clemson has struggled to consistently throw the football. Now, the concern, though, Ryan, is they are dangerous throwing the football.
Yeah.
Antonio Williams is a freshman that's having a nice year. You've got Joseph Nagata and Bo Collins are big 6'4" plus targets. They've got two really good tight ends, productive tight ends, and Davis Allen, and the other kid whose name I really still have a hard time pronouncing. And they'll throw to their backs out of the backfield. Will Shipley will make plays out of the backfield. So there are weapons there, but Clemson has the same issue that Notre Dame has: quarterback play.
Yeah.
The quarterback play has not been good. And you've got to make sure that stays the same, because this number down here, Ryan, right here, this is going to be the key to this matchup. If Notre Dame can't pressure the quarterback and DJ gets comfortable in the pocket, he will hurt Notre Dame because he's got good weapons and he does have a big arm. They'll hit the seams. Clemson loves to throw downfield shots. They love to attack the seams. You can't give them enough time to step into those throws and make them accurately. That's going to be the key. They've got good weapons. Notre Dame's got good talent on the second level. They've got guys at the backfield. Notre Dame has linebackers, as we saw last week, a Viper and Isaiah Foskey that can run with backs. It's not a lack of talent, athleticism thing. Notre Dame has the athleticism and talent if they play well to stop Clemson on offense. Clemson also has the talent right on offense that if Notre Dame defense doesn't play well or makes the mental mistakes that they've been prone to make, will make them pay. Yep. So talent-wise, I think this is a pretty even matchup in the second and third level. The difference has to be up front. Notre Dame has to control that matchup. They have to win that matchup. If Clemson gives DJ time to throw, it's going to be a long day. If Notre Dame can pressure him consistently, then they're going to have a chance to keep Clemson in check. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I already said one part of it, right, Brian? Like the offensive line is better than it was last year, but I still wouldn't say it's very good, right? Like it's an okay unit. The offensive line is not great. Notre Dame hasn't
terrible. Here's what. The quarterback's not terrible. Last year he was terrible.
Yes, he was.
This year he's just been mediocre.
Exactly. And for me, the offensive line wise, you have some advantages that you can take, right? Isaiah Foskey is better than any offensive lineman that Clemson has talent-wise. Like, there's no conversation there, right? Riley Mills should be able to create some pressure. You have Justin Admilola should be able to create some pressure. You should have the opportunities to create interior pressure with Riley and Jason Admilola and Howard Cross. I think you have a lot of opportunities in this football game to make things difficult. Jordan Botello, if he starts to get added reps after having 2 sacks last week, there's opportunities from a pass rush perspective versus the Clemson pass protection. I think that there is. And I will also say this, Brian. DJ has played much better than last year. I mean, he was awful last year. This year, he's been solid. He's been pretty good.
Right.
Majority of the season, anyway. He's been pretty good. The one thing about DJ, though, is that DJ is a very long kid who everything about him says clean process or things get hairy very quickly. And what I mean by that is that he has a long delivery. He's got long limbs. Stepping up in the pocket is going to take a little bit longer for him than some guys, right?
He can't speed up his delivery in the face of pressure. And here, and this is why I don't love quarterbacks that are also pitchers.
That's a good point.
He was a pitcher in high school, and he threw over 90 miles per hour. This kid has a cannon for an arm, but he's not a natural thrower of the football. He's got a very uncomfortable looking delivery. Now, again, I don't care about deliveries as far as, I mean, you know me. Mechanics are fine, except when they create problems. His throwing motion, it makes it hard for him to have consistent, accurate ball placement.
I agree.
And the other thing, to your point, Ryan, which is a great point, is because of the length of that delivery and the uncomfortable nature he has, though he's not being a natural thrower, when he has to speed up, he gets really erratic.
Very
because
erratic.
His release point gets totally screwed up when he has to speed up his delivery because because of that long release. So I wanted to just kind of go in a little bit more detail explaining why that's a problem, because that's a great point, Ryan. Is that long release when he does not have a clean pocket is very problematic for him.
And when his process becomes long, you can force him into mistakes, and you can force his accuracy to take a big nosedive to the erratic nature of it. Those things are all on the table for Notre Dame. And the other part of it is, you mentioned Antonio Williams, right? Antonio Williams is kind of that quick separator slot type, right? Like he can get in and out of breaks and do all type of stuff. But for the most part, you have outside receivers in Joseph Ngata and Bo Collins and Dakari Collins that are long-limbed, catch-point wide receivers who are not going to create instant separation. Those are guys that you're going to hit some back shoulder balls. You're going to throw 50-50 balls down the field. Like those are the types of plays that those guys are going to win. And that also takes a longer process to let develop and to get an opportunity to make those plays. So you have to get after DJ. You have to force his process to speed up. You have to force him into some mistakes. Because I promise you that if Notre Dame gets a good amount of pressure on DJ Uiagalelei throughout the entirety of this football game consistently, he will be forced into some bad decisions, and he will have some erratic throws. Those things will happen. From there, if those happen, it's now Notre Dame's job on the second and third level to create some big plays, right? Let's get another Howard Cross tips a ball in the air and Maris Loifau comes back with an interception. Notre Dame had 2 interceptions last week. They only had 1 coming into the football game. They should have had 3. They're turning the ball over now last week better than they had been. You need to force a couple more this week. You have to.
Ryan, here's another thing about that long release. Now he throws it. I mean, it gets where it needs to get to in a hurry, right?
Oh, he's got velocity, no doubt. Yeah.
Right. But for example, the throw that Cam Hart almost picked off, if you read a route like that from him, you're picking it off because he doesn't have enough velocity to overcome how long that is if you jump it.
Right.
So to back up your point, the biggest difference between DJ this year and last year is he's better in a clean pocket. And I'm going to give you the numbers on this, Ryan. This is from Pro Football Focus. As we've said before, their grades suck, their analysis suck, their data collection is excellent. Last year, again, in a clean pocket, DJ completed 62.9% of his passes, 6.3 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, 7 picks. That's terrible numbers from a clean pocket. His numbers last year when pressured, 33% completions, 4.9 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks. Now, this year, his numbers when pressured aren't much better. 36.2% completions, only 5.3 yards per attempt. The difference is when in a clean pocket this year, he's completing 70.7% of his throws, 8.3 yards per attempt, and he has a 14-3 touchdown to interception ratio. He's doubled his touchdowns, cut his interceptions in half, and that's only in 8 games. Yards per attempt, over 2 yards higher, and an almost 8% jump in completion percentage. That's where DJ has gotten better this year. He's still the same guy he was last year when he gets pressured. So to your point, that's going to be a big part of this game. And then, of course, a big part of that is last year in 13 games, he had 123 dropbacks where he was pressured. This year in 8 games, he's had 60. If you put that out over the course of the entire season, that's significantly fewer dropbacks where he's been pressured. Right. So last year in 8 games this year, he's got 47 attempts when pressured. Last year in 13 games, he had 97 attempts under pressure. The point being, they've done a better job of keeping him clean. Now, the thing that's benefited them is they haven't really played anybody that's got a great pass rush. So, that factors into it as well. Notre Dame has to be able to, and it's not about sacks. I don't care if they have 5 sacks in this game. You could sack him 5 times and lose by 20. Right. It's about consistent pressure. It's about not letting him ever get comfortable as a passer. That's going to be the key to this game, Ryan. If Notre Dame can do that, then they've got that. They will create. He'll miss on tunnel, and he'll look like Drew Pine last week. He will look like that if you can consistently pressure him. We've seen it happen. So that's going to be a big part of this game, Ryan. For me, is the pressure has to be consistent, and then you have to do things. This is also a week where, as long as you can do it without confusing your guys, this is one of those weeks, Ryan, where you really want to see him, Al Golden, I'm referring to, mix up his looks.
Yes.
This is one of those games where you can bait DJ into a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you got to be careful because you don't want to do it right. Where where you're kind of, okay, your guys blow a coverage, right? But you get into situations where if you can do it and your guys are comfortable with it, this is the perfect week to make those things happen and have some success.
And we did see Al Golden, I think, do a good job of that in the first half last week, especially, right? Like, I think the first play of the game made it look like man coverage, and then Brandon Joseph just drops underneath the inside breaking route and pick six, man. Like, that's the type of game that you need against DJ, is that he will make that type of mistake if you cloud his vision, right? And I think it's a great point, Brian. It's not about sacks. Sacks are nice, right? Like, it's awesome. If you can get home and you finish guys on the ground, that's fantastic. But I don't always want DJ to finish on the ground. I want him to finish on the ground, but also throw the football, because I think that you can bait him into bad mistakes. Right. I think you can. I want him to speed up his process consistently, want to get hits on him, but I want him also to be forced into some mistakes. That's the biggest thing for me, is that turnover number, which, I mean, last week, if you watched the show, Notre Dame was 131st in turnovers at that point, right? Because they only recorded one on the season. You had 2 last week against Syracuse. Should have been 3 with that phantom offsides call on that Brandon Joseph interception. Notre Dame is starting to hopefully start to get that number up a little bit. And this is a game where you need it to happen. Turnovers, I think, are going to be a big part of this football game.
Ryan, I think the thing that I look at too is I want to kind of finish up this conversation that we're having about the pressures. So they've played, I'd say, the three best teams they've played this year: Wake, NC State, and Syracuse. Against Wake Forest, DJ was 23 of 33 for 359 yards and 4 touchdowns, no picks, and a clean pocket. Was 1 of 8 for 12 yards when pressured. Against NC State, 18 of 21 for 174 yards and a touchdown with a clean pocket. He was 3 of 9 for 35 yards when pressured. Against Syracuse, he was 12 of 18 for 134 yards, 2 picks when in a clean pocket, and under pressure, he was 1 of 3 for 5 yards. So again, and I think that pressure that they didn't get clean pockets. Syracuse we talked about this. They do a lot of things secondary wise where they're going to roll their coverages and do different things. And they were able to bait him into some mistakes last week. Mm-hmm. And so I think Notre Dame can learn from all 3 of those teams. Is if you can get pressure on them, you're going to have some success. I mean, if you can get him to throw 9 or 10 passes from a not clean pocket, because again, he only had 3 attempts against Syracuse because he got benched. But you look at like Florida State, for example. Florida State only forced him to throw 4 passes from a pressure pocket. That's it. It's not good enough. You got to get more. Boston College, he did 8. They stink. They're not a good defense, right? But if you look at, I said earlier, 47 of it, he's thrown 47 passes from when pressured. See, 21 of them have happened in 3 games against the 3 ranked teams they've had, and that's why those games were competitive, is because they could force them into mistakes. So it just backs up the point that we're talking about, right? And it's not about blitzing him, because his blitz numbers are actually decent. On the season, his blitz numbers are actually not that bad when you blitz him, because blitzing a guy, all you're doing is giving him one-on-ones. And he's got good weapons to get the ball out. So it's not so much about blitzing him. And if you look at his numbers on the year, he's 38 of 65, which is 58.5% completion, 7.8 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns and 3 picks when blitzed. That's not great, but it's not bad. It's about pressure. And there's a difference. Ideally, you want to get pressure with not having to blitz. Last year against the blitz, when blitzed, he was only 43.4%. completion percentage, 3 touchdowns and 6 picks, and the 5.6 yards per attempt. So again, he's gotten better in that regard, which comes from experience. He knows where to go with the ball. It's about pressure, because if you blitz and don't get pressure, he's going to hurt you, right? So your blitzes better be well designed and well timed and effective, because if you start blitzing a bunch, then that's where you could start. That's where all of a sudden a tunnel screen goes for 50.
Yeah.
Or he bangs a post route, for 50 over the top like he did in 2020 because you blitzed and didn't get home.
And I think you can feel pretty optimistic if you're Notre Dame on this side of the pressure conversation too, Brian, because if you mentioned Wake Forest, you mentioned Syracuse, you mentioned NC State, Notre Dame's defensive line is significantly more talented than all three of those teams. Like, this is the best defensive line that Clemson will be facing up until this point. Like, it is. I think it's pretty comfortable too. Like, none of those teams have an Isaiah Foskey.
We had that question, Ryan, we were going to address in the mailbag. So let's talk about that now. You said, Brian, this is from Beefeater, Brian and Ryan. What is Clemson's defensive line go? Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. There was another one that asked about whether or not this is the best defensive line Notre Dame's going to face. I don't think I started. But yes, Ryan, I think you are correct. This is without question. And NC State's this year has been a 3-down front. At least they were against Clemson. They ran mostly a 3-down front. And so they were just kind of big guys eating up space. This is the 4-down front and the best front they're going to face, in my opinion. Now, Jared Verse is a dude. I don't think he played that game. Did he play that game against Clemson?
Don't believe so.
That factored into it. So, those things all factor into the conversation. I'm going to actually look up if he played that game, because I remember he was questionable going into the game. I don't remember if he actually played or not. And if he did, he wasn't 100%.
I mean, because if you look at it, Brian, right, it's like Wake Forest, they have one good defensive lineman. Kobe Turner's a pretty good defensive tackle. Otherwise, not a lot up front. Syracuse, if you guys want to hear about Syracuse's defensive line, just go back to our previews this past week. Like, they have a couple solid football players, but like, they're not great up front. They're not. And then when you look at, otherwise, Clemson just hasn't played a ton of great defensive linemen this year, especially if they didn't play Jared Verse, because Jared Verse is a dude.
He played, but he only had 14 rushes in the game, so he was very limited.
So he was limited a little bit
compared
in that
to 40 against LSU. He just hasn't been the same kid since he got hurt.
Yep.
I mean, that's the reality of it. He had 9 pressures in the first 2 games, got hurt the next week, right? Since then, he's only had 7 pressures all year.
Man, his game against LSU was outrageous. Jared Verse, outrageous.
Yep. He just hasn't been the same kid ever since. So, yeah, his playing time that game was a little bit limited, especially as a pass rusher. So, he did play in that game. So, let's go to the final matchup, Ryan, and that is the scoring offense against the scoring defense. Again, I think this is a little bit misleading. Notre Dame's points per game, to me, is a tad misleading. I think Notre Dame obviously offensively has given up a touchdown this year, so that factors into it. They had a special teams punt return against BYU. They gave up a touchdown this year. And also the points are a big part, because when teams get into the red zone, they're guaranteed to score so far this year, Ryan. Guaranteed to score. Notre Dame has allowed opponents to score on all 20 of their red zone trips, which is just a fascinating number. But here's the positive. Notre Dame's tied for 14th in fewest red zone trips allowed. And if you look at the teams ahead of them, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of the teams either tied or ahead of them are group of 5 teams.
Wow.
So if you only look at FBS teams or Power 5 teams, Notre Dame is top 5 or 6 in that, or 6 or 7 in that regard. So, they don't let you get into the red zone very much, and that's going to be a key for this game. And then you look at Clemson's, red zone offense and defense. It's a red zone offense. It's very good. Yeah, that's going to be a big part of this game. Big part of this game. This is the game where you've got to figure out, because third down's similar. Notre Dame ranks higher in yards per game and yards per play, much higher. Notre Dame doesn't force many turnovers. Clemson doesn't turn it over very much. Or haven't lost a fumble all year. Props to them for that. But Notre Dame doesn't give up a lot of yards. And when they do, it's a couple big plays here and there. They rank pretty high there. But when teams get in the red zone, they're guaranteed points. If you just ranked Notre Dame in the 70s in those 2 areas, they're a top 20 scoring defense.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's strange, Ryan. It's very, very strange. And Notre Dame ranks dead last in the country in those areas.
Yeah, and I look at that touchdown percentage in the red zone for Notre Dame. Like, that's the one that really sticks out to me, Brian, because obviously, you look at that 100% and you're just like, that's, 20 out of 20. Like, that's just not great. But I mean, especially in this game, Notre Dame cannot give up touchdowns in the red zone because, Syracuse, Clemson has been pretty good in that department, right? Like, this is a team that you can't let, because if Clemson's able to finish drives and score touchdowns, that probably tells me that you're not stopping the run very well. Because again, that's how Clemson's built, in my opinion, and that's how they've had their success. So I think especially that touchdown percentage, if Clemson gets into the red zone, Notre Dame has to at least hold the field goals, because they have not been good just stopping teams in general, but especially you can't let up a bunch of touchdowns like you have been so far this year.
Yeah. So that's going to be the key, Ryan. I mean, obviously, moving the chains, you got to limit those things. Early down success is going to be key. We'll talk about all that kind of stuff tomorrow. But, I mean, that's the thing is make them settle for field goals. That's going to be a big key. Make them settle for field goals. If you can finally do that, I mean, again, I don't even care if you let them score. Just, they can go 7 for 7 for all I care. And as long as that 7 for 7 means they only scored 21 points because you held them to field goals every time, then you've got a chance to win this football game. There's no doubt about it. So
yes, sir.
So, Ryan, I say in this matchup, I would say it's pretty even in my view. I mean, I think both teams have been pretty good in the big games, especially. Notre Dame's defense has been very good in the big games this year. Clemson's offense has been a little bit more up and down in those two big games. I think Notre Dame has the advantage in the pass game. I think Clemson statistically has a slight advantage in the run game, but it's pretty even. It's pretty even there. Again, it's even here. Notre Dame's better in yards and yards per play. Clemson's better in the red zone and points. So I think the overall numbers favor Clemson. When you break it down individually, run game, pass game, Notre Dame has the advantage in one, and it's pretty even in another, with Notre Dame having slightly better numbers. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. And this is the thing that I think a lot of fans are not taking into account. The biggest difference between this Clemson team and past Clemson teams has been the offense. Part of the reason their defense isn't as good, in my opinion, is because their offense lets teams hang around a lot longer. And then again, they've given up some fourth quarter points because they put a lot of young guys in the game in the fourth quarter.
Yep.
And they've been prone to giving up the big plays as well. But the offense the numbers look good, right? 37 points per game and all that, which looks fine and certainly better than last year. But you're talking about a team that the last time they made the playoff, they were at 43.5. 19 they were 43.9, and 18 they were 44.3. 16 they were 39.2, and that was because I'm looking at that year. I still the Auburn game. I mean, they were consistently scoring more points than that. So I was curious as to why the number was as low as it was that particular year. So I have to go back and look at that and see why that got dragged down. But this year it's been kind of just a blah type of performance from their offense at times, but they're capable of getting hot, and that's going to make this a very, very interesting matchup. So, Ryan, that's going to do it for this part of the show. We're going to have a mailbag next, and we do have some questions started already. If you have some more questions, go ahead and fire those into us. We'll try to handle as many as we can. We're probably not going to go quite as long as we normally do, just because we have some other things we got to do. Ryan, there's 1 million kids visiting this weekend, and
yes.
Ryan has about he's writing up stories faster than I can publish them. We're going to have a ton of stories on the site at irishbreakdown.com this week from recruits that are going to be visiting. Big time weekend. We're going to talk about that a little bit more during the week as well. Obviously, you're getting Peyton Bowen coming on campus this weekend. That's going to be huge, getting Peyton and Eli Bowen on campus this weekend. Huge. I'm going to have an article coming up about that here later today, and we'll talk more about it this week, how important that is for Notre Dame. But going to be a big weekend, so Ryan's got to get back to that for sure. But we do want to get to some questions here first. But before we go to the mailbag, everybody, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Please share this podcast. We would greatly appreciate that. If you're listening via podcast, please give us a 5-star review. Help us raise that rate up. We would greatly appreciate that if you're willing to do that for us. It helps us kind of get in front of more eyes. And I don't know how the algorithms work, but I just know that that's how the algorithms work. Same thing if you hit the like button. Same thing if you share our show with people as well. It's mailbag time, Mr. Roberts. Let's get to it, man. Let's get to it. Christopher Galloway with a super chat. Thank you, Christopher. He says, do we see the tall package of 16 Deion Colsey, 15 Tobias Merriweather, and Lorenzo Styles or Jaden Thomas on the field Saturday night?
I hope so. I hope so, man. Like that's what I mean. You need it, right? And Brian, this is an interesting Clemson secondary too, because we didn't talk about this, but it's not the lengthy group that they usually have either. Like I know Nate Wiggins is a pretty long kid for the most part, but they got a couple shorter corners, and Andrew Makuba is only about 5'10", 5'11". So like they're not incredibly tall in the back end either. So I think Notre Dame can take advantage of the length that they have with Deion Colsey on the field, with Tobias, with Lorenzo playing more of the slot option, or Jaden Thomas in the slot, and even Michael Mayer in some situations outside. Like I think that Notre Dame does have a potential advantage against Clemson's secondary because they are not the long group that they usually have on the back ends.
Well, and I would also say that beyond the length, Ryan, I would argue that you just listed 3 of the 4 most talented players at the position, and they're finally playing them.
Yeah,
So it's certainly nice to see that, but I think that's a big part of it, right? Is you get your best players in the field and play them. That's going to be a big key.
And I think that we get. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh no, I was just going to say, and the fact that last week, I mean, Tobias ends up with no catches, but like you saw, Brian, there were a couple plays where Notre Dame was trying to get it, right? Like they were trying to get him downfield. They were trying to take advantage of that opportunity. And then again, Deion Colsey got a lot more opportunities than what we've seen of him so far. And he capitalized on it, man. Like he was efficient. He caught some of those back shoulder balls on, kind of the working some comebacks, and then that over route off of the bootleg. Like there was a lot of good stuff there, man. So as those guys continue to get more involved in the offense and the confidence builds with them, I think that just makes Notre Dame's offense so much more dynamic from a passing game perspective.
Well, there's no question. And I'll say this too. I think that's an area where you talk about the specific matchup, Ryan. I think that's an area where when you just look at it from a pass game standpoint, the safety matchup is even more intriguing than the corner matchup. A lot more intriguing. And I'm going to give you some numbers to y'all that are just going to kind of blow your mind a little bit when you talk about this matchup. So Notre Dame's deep group of safeties, and I took into account all 5 kids that play. I'm talking about Ramon Henderson, Brandon Joseph, Houston Griffith, DJ Brown, Xavier Watts. I added up all their numbers together. Okay. This year in 8 games, Notre Dame's 5 safeties have given up 312 passing yards. If you look at Clemson, they play a rotation of 4 guys. Okay. They play Andrew Makuba, who Ryan talked about, Jalen Phillips, who I talked about earlier, was a really good run defender, one of their leading tacklers. They also play RJ Mickens, and they also play who's the son of former NFL player Ray Mickens, and then they also play Tyler Venables at safety, who is the son of former defensive coordinator Brent Venables, current head coach at Oklahoma. The 4 safeties that play for Clemson have given up 695 passing yards this season. 695 compared to 312 for Notre Dame's kids. I think it's 312 for Notre Dame's kids. So that's a matchup you have to exploit. You have to exploit that matchup with Michael Mayer, with Tobias Merriweather, with Jaden Thomas, with Braden Lindsey, with Lorenzo Styles, with your running backs. That has to be a big part of what you're doing. And if you don't go after their safeties early and often, then you have failed your football team, in my opinion, from a pass game standpoint and from a game planning standpoint. That's just kind of how I see that one. Next question. We actually had another super chat down here. Actually, I'm going to get Ryan back here because he's getting ready to jump back in. Ryan, you didn't hear the numbers that I gave. We were talking about the pass game. Notre Dame's 5 safeties have given up 312 passing yards this year.
Okay.
Clemson's 4-man safety rotation has given up 695 passing yards this season.
It's a little different.
Yes, it's incredibly different. And the point being, that's the matchup you really have to go after in this game.
Yep.
And they've got 2 guys this year at the safety position, Ryan, that if you look at the numbers, they're close to Notre Dame's guys just themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at Andrew Makuba's given up 254 passing yards this year. Notre Dame's entire secondary depth chart has only given up, trying to do the math here, what would be 58 more than that as a unit.
Mm-hmm.
So Jalen Phillips has given up 214. That's less than 100 less than Notre Dame's entire safety depth chart. Nate Wiggins is 183 and Tyler Venables is 167.
It's wild.
Yes, it is. So that's a matchup certainly that Notre Dame is going to have to exploit. And that's the thing is when Notre Dame has been really good in the pass game this year, it's been going after safeties.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they think of Lorenzo's had a lot of his success in those matchups. Jaden Thomas has had most of his success in those matchups. Michael Mayer, obviously, in those matchups. Tobias Merriweather had his long touchdown against those matchups.
Yeah.
So that's something that you're going to have. That's an area where you look at and you say, boy, that's something you're going to have to try to exploit in this game.
Because I was going to say, Brian, to exactly the point you just made, that the 4 guys listed right there, 3 of them have made a decent amount of plays in the slot, right? Like at least they're most effective and efficient plays in the slot. And even think back to the 2020 game, what was the big Avery Davis down the seam, right? For the big gain. Yeah, exactly.
Beating the safety on an inside post route.
100%. Because I don't really think that Clemson's ever really had great safety play. Like they've always just had like okay players
the best
back
safety
there,
they've
like
had
Tanner
the last
Muse.
7-8 years, Ryan, was Isaiah Simmons.
Right, and he wasn't even a full safety, right? Like it's just like exactly.
I think 2015 is probably the last time I thought they had good safeties. Remember they had J-Ron Curse was one of their safeties that year. Was it Tyler Green? I'm trying to remember his last name was Green. I'm trying to remember his TJ Green.
I know TJ Green.
Yeah, TJ Green. And he was a good player. That was the last probably really good safety group that they had. I mean, if you count Isaiah Simmons as a safety, sure. Tanner Muse was probably the next best guy. Kayvon Wallace was just okay.
And he played most in the slot anyway, more than just like true safety anyway. So
Nolan Turner and Joseph Charleston and Landon Zanders. Landon Zanders is the guy that Avery Davis smoked for that long play. Nolan Turner's the guy that Kyron Williams absolutely juked out of his shoes on his long touchdown run in that game. I mean that's been an area of weakness for them, in my opinion.
I'm surprised Nolan Turner is not back for his 12th year.
I know, right?
I felt like he was there forever, man.
No kid. I was like, yeah, he's going to be back. All right, we got some more questions here. We got another super chat from Tristan Marks. Thank you, Tristan, very much. This season's filming, coupled with Arch and Tyler together being a slam dunk 3 title runs, easy to sell the Manning family. He's not coming to Notre Dame. I mean, yeah, he's not. And that's so absurd about when that rumor started this summer about, the Mannings are on campus and it's recruiting. It's like it had nothing to do with recruiting. I made 10 phone calls about that. It had nothing to do with recruiting. It had to do with all the different things that they've done now. We've now seen 2 different shows from ESPN or from Omaha Productions, I should say, about that. But he wasn't coming to Notre Dame.
Which is fantastic. Fantastic team. Yeah. I think we talked about it before, but Omaha Productions, it's fantastic.
It really is. It really is. But no, it's not an easy sell to the Mannings. I mean, with all due respect, going to Texas, they're going to have their fair share of weapons. But they've got a guy that I believe is a very good developer of quarterbacks, in my opinion. I mean, just look at what he's done with guys who aren't talented. I mean, he turned Keith Price into a pretty darn good Pac-12 quarterback.
I forgot about Keith Price. He was good players last year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, he's a pretty, in my opinion, a pretty darn good developer of quarterbacks. And he's made Quinn Ewers a solid player. I was not very high on Quinn Ewers up here.
Right.
And Sark's been able to do a good job of getting that kid to play within the system and do it. And that's not an easy thing to do with that kid, in my opinion. So that's not going to be an easy sell. As much as we like to say it, it's not going to be an easy sell.
And Eli and Peyton might be frequenting Notre Dame a little bit, but we also have to remember that Arch is Cooper's son, not Eli or Peyton. So that's another conversation. Yes.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. Next question. Christopher Galloway with another super chat. Thank you, Christopher. Will our linebackers have trouble covering Clemson's tall tight ends? This could happen on RPOs. They don't use the tight ends a ton on RPOs and routes that would be against the linebackers vertically. Mm-hmm. They will use the vertical RPOs they'll hit are more perimeter throws. If they're to hit a tight end on an RPO, Ryan, it'd be like a little quick pot pass where you get sucked in.
Right.
Now, Notre Dame's better positioned to defend that stuff this year because Marist is so much longer, and Notre Dame has been using their safeties in a lot of those instances as well.
Which is
why you haven't seen him get hurt with that a lot.
I was going to say, I feel like tight ends and just slots in general really haven't hurt Notre Dame a ton this year. If we're thinking about it, right? Not over the middle of the field. And to your point, I would say, because there's a big distinction between an RPO and a play action pass, right? The tight ends, I feel like, are more seam players off of play action, like true play action looks where they're getting down the middle. And then in the red zone, they've been a threat, obviously, in those situations as well. So I think that they do have, to Christopher's question, I think Notre Dame does have the skill set to counteract those things, whether it's Brandon Joseph coming down, whether it is Maris Loifel getting underneath. Like, I think they do have some options to counteract that length.
Yep, absolutely. We'll keep rolling along, but I think We Are Not Marshall made it into town. He put a message up earlier. He said, made it to New York safely. The content in the chat makes this trip a lot easier. Thanks, everyone. Obviously, continue to keep him and his father-in-law in your thoughts and prayers. And then take his advice. IB fam, hit that like button. Help drive the content so we can enjoy this every day. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate
yes,
you.
Sir.
And I'm glad that you're sticking with us even when you're with your family, that you're still making time to be with your Notre Dame family as well. We appreciate you. Irish Blooded asks, it says, according to the news, there should be some rain weather on Saturday morning, afternoon. What, if anything, do you think that helps, hurts either team knowing their preferences? I don't think it necessarily hurts either team a whole lot. I think the team it probably hurts more is Clemson, just because they put more on their pass game. But honestly, his arm is so big that I don't think the wind and rain would hurt him as much as it would a kid like Drew Pine. And then you'd say, well, but Drew Pine's used to playing fall football in Connecticut, so he's used to playing in the cold and in wind as well. So, I mean, if Notre Dame can't throw the football, I think it hurts them a little bit. But I think Notre Dame has a better chance at running on Clemson in a downpour than Clemson has on running against Notre Dame if they can't throw the football because of conditions. But I don't think it's a difference where, oh, gee, this team's going to win now because of the weather. I think these are pretty evenly constructed teams, or similarly constructed teams. Schematically, they're very different. I wish Notre Dame did as much RPO as Clemson did, because then they'd be scoring a lot more points. However, the basic philosophy that they want to be, run the ball on offense, set up other things, shut down the run on defense, limit the big plays. These teams are very similar in their big picture philosophies, how they want to play football this year, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, Brian, like, both these teams want to run the football and they want to defend the run well. Like, those are things that they want to do. So I don't think it really hurts either one. I think if anything, it plays into each other's favors, but then also if it plays into your favor, but then also it helps the other team as well, that's kind of like, an immovable force hits a brick wall, right? Like, I mean, what's going to stop it, right? Type of thing. So I think there's a back and forth. So I think the jockeying it kind of becomes neutralized, in my opinion, a little bit, because that's kind of what both teams do well. You know what I mean? So it doesn't really matter a whole ton.
Ryan, we've got this next question from Beefeater. We pulled it up earlier. And he says, Brian and Ryan, what is Clemson's defensive line going to do to try and mess with our recent O-line success? I don't think Clemson has to do anything different. No. I mean, it's about trusting your players. It's about having a good scheme. Make sure that you're coming off the line hard. It's about execution. It's about using your hands effectively. I don't think Clemson's going to try to do anything different. I think with their defensive line, I think what they're going to do differently is put more bodies in the box behind them. I don't think their defensive line has to do anything different. It's put numbers in the box and make Notre Dame look. Any defensive coordinator that doesn't say we're going to make Notre Dame beat us on the perimeter should not be doing this anymore. He should find a new line of work. If you've watched this football team the last month and your game plan isn't, I'm going to make Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey and Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colsey and Matt Salerno and Jaden Thomas beat me. The running backs aren't beating me, and Michael Mayer's not beating me. And as I've said before, and I said this summer, it's a lot easier to shut down Michael Mayer in the pass game and the run game, because everything that you're going to do on Michael Mayer is looking right through into the backfield because of the way that Notre Dame uses him. If they were to line him up outside more, makes that a little bit more challenging. Move him around a little bit more, it can make that more challenging. But if they're just going to line up in 12 and 13 all day with him attached to the line of scrimmage, it makes it a lot easier for a good defense to defend that. And this is the best defense Notre Dame will have faced since Ohio State.
Yep.
With all due respect to Syracuse. It's also, and even if you want to say, okay, Syracuse ranks better in some statistical categories, okay, fine. It's definitely the toughest matchup for Notre Dame since Ohio State, because Syracuse just physically couldn't hold up against Notre Dame. They're not big enough. They're not strong enough. Clemson can. And that's the difference. And so you're not going to just push them around. You're going to have to execute at a high level, game plan at a high level. Let's go proper order. Game plan at a high level, call at a high level, and then execute at a high level up front. It just can't be my dudes against your dudes. You're going to have to help your dudes out with a really good game plan that keeps – Because again, if Clemson can just do this all day like Syracuse could, they're going to shut Notre Dame's run game down.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't mix it up and protect your line a little bit, because again, you only got 5 of those dudes, right? They're going to have 8 or 9 coming at the run game, and you got 5 blockers, the 5 of those big boys. And now I hope that the tight ends can block as well as they did last week. Can I say this? I've been very hard on Michael Mayer's blocking this year.
Blocked well last week.
His butt off last week against Syracuse.
I think it's probably been trending up the last couple games, really. But last week
was
especially.
better against UNLV. Yeah, and I think that says so much about that kid. There's nothing. There's no. He doesn't. Is any NFL team going to ding him because he's not a great blocker? No, because you're bringing him in for the pass game. That's what it's about nowadays.
And he has all the tools to be a good blocker still, right? Like those things are there.
Strength.
Yeah.
The fact that he's clearly working on that part of his game this late in his season and career says everything you need to know about who Michael Mayer is. I was going to talk about it only upon further review, but I couldn't be on it. But I wanted to say that, and it just reminded me of that his effort and execution in the run game last week was, I would argue, was probably the best blocking game of his career last week, Ryan. I mean, I really would. And it just says a lot about him. I mean, he's a great player, but I have heard so many stories about the kind of leader he is and the kind of person he is in the locker room that even outshines his production as a pass catcher. And I think the fact that he's still improving his game, to me, he's almost a lock as a first-round pick. I'd be shocked if he's not a first-round pick.
I would,
and yet he's still out there, despite he's already proven himself to be that. He's still out there improving his game.
Yep.
I mean,
and he could just sit on that passing game production too, Brian, and it'd be like you are one of the best players to ever play at Notre Dame, like at the position, like one of the best ever. But the fact that he wants to be the best possible player he can be, to your point, it speaks volumes, man. It does. That's the type of leader you need. That's the type of leader you need.
And it says a lot about the character aspect of it. It really does. And again, I'm going to hammer him when he doesn't block well because that's our job. It's not personal. But when he blocks well like that, I mean, it needs to be commended because he, like you said, Ryan, he could easily just say, "Look, man, I'm just going to go there and keep putting my numbers and do what I got to do." But he's clearly still trying to help this football team win games. If this is what I got to do to help win games, that's what I'm going to do. For it, just I know we all appreciate his talent, but I still don't feel like Notre Dame fans quite understand just how good he is in every aspect of football.
During the game chat this week on the message board, sign up at board.irishbreakdown.com, by the way. I said, Brian, and I meant it, man. I was like, I think we all just need to take a step back here and just appreciate truly how good Michael Mayer is, because I think that we gets kind of lost a little bit, man. Like everyone knows he's great, but the person he is, the hard worker he is, the quality of player he is, the fact that he's going to walk out of here as one of the best to ever do it at Notre Dame, a school that produces tight ends as well as anyone in college football. Like, such a great player, man. It's crazy.
That's like being one of the best running backs ever at USC, right? Like, you got to be pretty darn good to be in that conversation. But it's not just about the play. That's great. Yeah. But it's the character. It's the leadership that he brings to the table that I don't think we appreciate. Like honestly, Notre Dame's going to be okay at tight end next year from a production standpoint for 2 reasons. Number one, the kids they have coming up are really good. Now, are any of them as good as Michael Mayer? No. But I think next year also you're going to have more support around him. They won't be asked to carry the team the way that Michael Mayer was asked to carry this team, where they're going to miss Michael Mayer even. That's not saying they're not going to miss him. Please understand me. They're going to miss him. But they'll be able to overcome it with production at receiver, production at running back, and you're going to have some talented kids at tight end still playing.
Right.
Where they're going to miss him more than anything is what we just talked about. It's the leadership, the accountability that he instills. I mean, when your best player is your hardest worker, I mean, it's really can't be dismissed. And I know it gets lost because how bad the offense has been this year, but you see his frustration on the sidelines of games, and he fights so hard to not let that show because he's trying to be a leader, but you see it sometimes, but you just know how it's because of how bad he wants this. Like, did you see him at the end of the Stanford game?
Yes.
I mean, kid was crushed.
Yeah.
Kid was crushed.
Perfect exemplary of this, Brian, or example of this is when the Cal game, right? Where they missed Michael Mayer down the seam wide open, right? Drew Pine missed him. He was clearly frustrated on the field. There was no doubt. Frustrated. Comes to the sideline, though. What's his first impulse? I'm going to pick Drew up. I'm going to pick Drew up, man. Like, I'm going to pick you up. Like that. I think that says everything you need to know about Michael Mayer. I truly do.
Next question, 99 problems, but BK ain't one. I still love that name, by the way. Ryan, if rankings are – this is about the earlier conversation. If rankings are based upon resume, why is Alabama 6th? They have beaten nobody, no ranked teams. That's inaccurate, by the way. They have beaten a ranked team. It's Texas. And lost to the only ranked team they played, UT, Tennessee. They are living off of the past and perception. What say you, Mr. Roberts?
It's because they only have one loss right now, 99 problems. And to Brian's point, they have beaten a ranked team. Their only loss was also to – where is Tennessee in the ranking right now? Where are they? Number 1?
And Alabama took them down to the wire.
That game could have went either way. Could have went either way. Exactly.
Right.
Could have went either way.
It was,
and you
could be getting ready to go to overtime, if not for that huge freaky play at the end of the game. Right. I mean, and look, Alabama also. I mean, the Texas win is a little bit overinflated because I think they put Texas in just to pump up Alabama's resume. Number one, but they did go on the road and blow out Arkansas with their backup quarterback. You know, they beat Texas A&M in an ugly game, so I don't give them a lot of credit for that. But then they bounced back and they beat a pretty solid Mississippi State team. I mean, Mississippi State's a good football team this year, and they beat them by 24. You know, so to me, you know, that's a quality win. Look, does Alabama deserve to be 6th? No, I think TCU should be ranked higher. Do they deserve to be in the 7 to 8 range? Yeah, they're still a good football team. I think the thing that some people feel about Bama is very similar to what we said about Clemson. Bama's not as good as they've been in the past. They're not. And there's been several games that honestly, they're a play here or a play there from losing those games. But here's the thing. They didn't have Bryce Young against Texas A&M. They played their backup. There's a giant drop-off between their backup quarterback and Bryce Young. So they were able to go not have their star and go out there and still win a football game. And so they're not as good as they've been. But that doesn't mean that they're still not one of the 7 or 8 best teams in the country right now off of resume.
Yep.
I mean, it is. I mean, they're still a team that's averaging, 43 points a game, giving up 16 points a game, 23-point road win over Texas A&M. And, and the rest of teams they played aren't any good, right? But they're destroying them. 55-0 over Utah State, 63-7 over Monroe, 55-3 over Vanderbilt. Convincing win over Mississippi State. If you take the A&M game out of the equation, I don't think anyone's questioning it. The Alabama, but the context of that game is they didn't have Bryce Young. Now, again, I've argued
your Heisman Trophy winner from last year,
by far their best player, and at a prime position. Yeah. So to me, I think they should be a spot lower. I do. They should be a spot lower, and I think resume wise, you could argue for some other teams being ahead of them, but I'm comfortable with them at 7. They should be behind TCU. TCU's got a better resume, better wins, all that. But, Bama's going to get their shot this weekend to go show it. There's not going to be any questioning about their resume if they're able to go into Death Valley this weekend and beat
the number
LSU.
10 team in the country.
Right. Ridiculous. Now, that's absurd.
As I roll my eyes.
That's absurd, but they're still a top 20 team, in my opinion.
I'm fine with that.
They've had.
I'm fine with that. But top 10?
They should be 17 to 20. And you go on the road and beat a top 17 to 20 team, that's a very good win. Now, the question that they're going to be evaluated by is how is that relative to what Tennessee did to LSU? And because there's going to be
40 to 13, right? 40 to 13 was the LSU
Tennessee lose 40 to 13, and it wasn't that close.
No.
If Tennessee loses in a close game to Georgia, and Alabama beats Georgia at the end of the year, there's going to be a very interesting conversation about the Tennessee-Alabama, who gets in from the SEC, or if both get in, right? Because you're going to have a 1-loss Georgia team, a 1-loss Alabama team, and a 1-loss Tennessee team. It's going to be fascinating. I just hope we don't get there. And I don't think we will. I still think Bama's going to drop another game. I do.
Yeah, well, I mean that'll make it a moot point at that point, but I mean there could be a realistic situation, Brian, where there might be 3 teams deserving to be in the playoffs from the SEC.
Praying for that. They're praying to whatever demonic gods that ESPN prays to that happens. So they would love that. Like,
sure would.
Love
if they had those 3, and then like Ohio State is one of the 4, like they would love that.
Oh
man.
Oh yeah. Freaking. Well, yeah. Whatever. Freaking ESPN. Mr. Shaughnessy, Every time I see this name, I think of that skit from. Have you seen that skit from Key and Peele? Go down to Shaq Hennessy's office right now and tell him what you got to watch it. You're a former teacher. You're gonna love this, Ryan.
Okay.
When we're done with the show, you need to go look up Key and Peele's substitute teacher.
I thought you said I had to get back to work after the show.
Nope, I'll give you that little reprieve. You have time to watch that. If you're not going to go watch Maverick, you can at least watch this for me, okay?
It's fair. It's fair.
So, but Mr. Shaughnessy asks, how many of our guys will sit out the bowl game if there are no major ramifications? Well, I don't think there should be ramifications for guys sitting out bowl games. I don't like it, but that's the world we live in, and it's somewhat understandable nowadays. Who will sit out the bowl game? I would imagine that Foskey would sit out the bowl game.
Mayer.
I would imagine Mayer will sit out the bowl game.
What shocked me if he ended up playing though, right?
Because you know what he's going to do? He's going to look back at the precedent set by other leaders. Yeah. Quentin Nelson played in a bowl game. Mike McGlinchey played in a bowl game. Ronnie Stanley played in a bowl game. Jalen Smith played in a bowl game. Now, everyone says, well, yeah, but Jalen blew his knee out. Yes, and since then, Mike McGlinchey and Quentin Nelson 2 years later played in a bowl game.
Exactly.
Right. So last year with Kyle Hamilton and Kyron Williams is a bit of an anomaly. Mm-hmm. So I'll bet you that Michael Mayer's agent is going to tell him, do not play, 100%. Play. And he would be doing his job he'd be representing his client well for what he's representing his client for to tell him that. But I'll bet you it's going to be a lot harder for Michael Mayer to make that decision than people think.
But Brian, players can't hire agents before they're done playing college sports.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they are able to have advisors, right?
I
mean, they know who their agents are going to be. But they can have agents now. Remember,
NIL agents.
NIL
Good
allows
point.
them to do that. So it's going to be the same person. But don't be shocked, even if he sits out, if it's a really late decision and it's a hard one for him. Yeah. For Foskey, I don't think it'll be a hard decision. I don't, unless he feels the need he has something to prove. Depending on the matchup, like here's where Foskey might play. He's getting some second round feedback. His agent or whatever is getting some second round feedback, and they're playing a team with a really good offensive tackle. And it's like, dude, do you want to be a late first, early second, or do you want to go play in this bowl game, against so and so offensive tackle who's also going to play, and you get a chance to and outplay him and prove yourself. Yep. But I would imagine not. The interesting ones are going to be some of the other guys that are unknowns, like does Jarrett Patterson sit out? Does Brandon Joseph, is Cam Hart, will they have made their decision to go pro or not yet and sit out? I would imagine that, any kid that has eligibility left that hasn't made a decision is going to play, but kids that have made their decision, they're not going to play. But I hope that they do play. I mean, Kevin Austin let me tell you something right now. Kevin Austin hadn't declared by the bowl game last year, but Kevin Austin had made his decision. Mm-hmm. Kevin Austin was leaving. That was decided. I was told that Ryan, you and I talked about that. That was before I hired you. I mean, it was getting close to your starting time. I mean, I had actually hired you, but before you officially started. Yep. But we had talked all that month leading up to that like, dude, Kevin Austin's not coming back next year. I mean, that was a given. And he still played. Mm-hmm. And he played hard, and he played well.
He did.
So I hope that a lot of those kids play. Part of it's going to depend, too, on how the season goes. If Notre Dame loses to 2 of their next 4, guys, dude, they're playing in the Cheez-It Bowl. Go get ready for the next level. I mean, don't risk tearing your knee up for the Cheez-It Bowl or the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Now, if they're playing in the Gator Bowl against Florida, it's a little different. One of the other bigger games, then, there's something a little different there. You have a chance to leave your mark in this program. I think that'll factor into it as well. It will. Because, like, if Notre Dame was 8-5 and playing in the 8-4 and playing in some lower level bowl against Iowa State, I don't know if Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey play. They may have. I'm saying I don't know. Right. But when you looked at LSU on the schedule, it's like, no, they're definitely playing. Mm-hmm. So and knowing Quentin Nelson, he still probably would have played. I mean, that dude's not going to turn down a chance to play football. But the reason I say McGlinchey, because McGlinchey was dealing with the back. A lot of people know he was dealing with a back issue. McGlinchey played hurt against LSU, which even adds to me the whole talk about leadership and character. Like, that dude played with a back issue. A lot of people didn't know that, but he was not 100% in that going into that game. I mean, if he would have had a legitimate reason not to play in that game, but he was like, my boys are playing, Q's playing, all my guys are playing, I'm playing, so I'm glad they did.
Jared Patterson's going to be an interesting one, Brian, because there's nothing to play for at that high of a level. I mean, he's had to deal with some injuries in his past, right?
Yes.
So he's a kid that I might advise not to play if I was the guy making the decisions. You know,
because that you said it right there, though. It's the injury history.
Yes.
Look, as long as he plays well, I don't know how. Jared Patterson's a 4-year starter.
Yep.
I don't know if there's a matchup out there that he could play well enough in that would change the standard much.
Yep.
You know, and with his injury history, you add to that. Like, do you really want him to risk that for the Cheez-It Bowl? You know, or even the Gator Bowl? That's a good question. But the other thing too is Notre Dame. Jared. Here's the other thing too is Jared's going to feel better about it, knowing, you know what, like, I'm leaving my team, but you know, you've got Andrew Kristofic. He is a starter. You know, he can handle business, right? I mean, they're going to be okay without me. I think that's part of what factors into the psyche of guys who are leaders. Jared Patterson is a leader of this team. You know, like after the Marshall game, I didn't like how he acted after the Marshall game, but he did it out of frustration because he wants to win, and he was really upset about what the opportunity that was lost. I don't like how he handled it, but I would have rather him have handled it poorly that way than to be like, whatever, I'm going to be drafted, so I don't care.
Right.
You know, that's not who Jared Patterson is. And so it's going to be a tough decision. But honestly, if I'm advising him, if I'm his dad, if I'm his agent, and he's healthy going into the bowl game, and it's not a huge bowl game, partner, you gotta look out for you, man. I mean, I've always said this. I think in today's era, if you're making a decision about what's best for you during the season, you're selfish. Once the regular season is over and you're not playing for a championship, I don't like it, but I don't view it the same way I did 10 years ago or 5-6 years ago when it first started. Just because this is the reality. I don't like it, but it's the reality. And for some players like Jared Patterson, I'm okay with it. I was not okay with it for Kyron Williams. I wasn't, because he wasn't hurt. You know, like, you're a captain. Go finish things out. I wasn't okay with it for Kyle Hamilton, because Kyle Hamilton basically opted out before the bowl game because he was healthy enough to come back late in the year, and he chose not to. That's different than, you know, a kid that like Jared Patterson, who's legitimately has had 3 major injuries in his career, and they're all different, right? And it's like, that's like Christian McCaffrey, who got this whole thing started. I actually understood Christian McCaffrey not playing because he was banged up all year.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a major bowl game. I got no problem with that. It's the guys that are just doing it just for the draft stock. That I don't like. But guys like that, and Michael Mayer, a kid who's taken a beating this year, it's kind of like, you know what, dude, I get it. You've left everything you've had. And that's why I didn't like it from Kyron Williams, but I'm not going to bang him for it, because no one can ever question whether or not Kyron Williams left everything he had on the field in the 12 regular season games.
Yep.
I do question that about Kyle Hamilton. 100% question that about Kyle Hamilton. And so that's why, even though I don't like it, I'm not hammering him for it, and I have no ill will towards Kyron for it. And they didn't lose because they didn't have Kyron. Chris Tyree had 115 receiving yards in that game. Okay, they didn't lose that because of him, right? He's not the one that was giving up plays. I've heard people say, if Kyron would have played, they'd have won. No, absolutely not. All right, got some more questions here. David Lowe, true or false? Notre Dame will be the best defense Clemson faces this year. Definitely.
Up until this point, I don't know what the rest of the schedule looks like, but up to this point, absolutely.
I don't know. They may play Georgia in the postseason. Just what we know of who they will play, who they've played so far, who they will play moving forward, and who they could potentially play in the ACC title game. No, there's not a better defense than that. There's definitely not a more talented defense than the one that they'll face on Saturday.
No doubt.
That's for sure.
No doubt.
99 problems of BK ain't one. Brian, you think Clemson will only continue their descent? I think they could pick up from where they are once Klubnik takes over. I think Klubnik, again, descent doesn't mean they're going to be 8-4 next year. It just means they're not going to be what they were. They hit a stretch from 15 to 19 where they were just, because even in 20, they weren't the same team in 20 because of the COVID stuff, and then Trevor missing games because of COVID. They weren't the same team, which is why they got hammered by Ohio State. They weren't the same team. But from 15 to 19, they were 1A, 1B with Bama, best team in the country. They're not that anymore. And even with Cade Klubnik, they're not that anymore. Can they still be the best team in the ACC? Yeah. Can they still be a playoff contender? Yeah. Can they still be a team that potentially could win a championship? Sure. They'd have to have some things go their way, because as I look into the future, Ryan, I don't see the same recruiting the last couple of years. I don't see the next Brian Bursey, the next Miles Murphy, the next Justin Ross, the next, you know what I mean? I don't see that as much anymore. And so I just don't think they're going to be that type of – I mean, we all talk about Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne, and Justin Ross and T. Higgins, but that defensive line in 2018 was insane.
Stupid, yeah.
Even without Dexter Lawrence, it was insane, because obviously Dexter didn't play against Notre Dame or Alabama. It was insane. They had two basically first-round talents at corner. A first-round talent in A.J. Terrell and a second, third-round talent in Trayvon McMullen. I mean, they don't have that kind of talent on their team anymore. I mean, the drop-off in the defensive line is minuscule from what it was in 2018. The drop-off in the secondary, light years.
Massive, yeah.
Light years compared to where it was in 2018. Same thing at receiver. These are good receivers. They're not T. Higgins and Justin Ross.
No, not close. Not close.
They're not. So Will Shipley's a good football player. He's closer to Travis Etienne than any of those other guys are to the other guys. And Cade Klubnik is not Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson. As much as I love him, he was my number one quarterback last year, Ryan. Yeah. But just because you're the number one quarterback in one year doesn't mean you're as good as the number one quarterback in other years.
Right.
So
it's not like anything to be ashamed of that you're not the next Trevor Lawrence, right?
He's going to be a really good player. They're still going to be the team to beat in the ACC as long as Cade is there. I love Cade Klubnik, but Cade Klubnik's not Trevor Lawrence. And the reason I say that is because the descent for Clemson started after 2018. Mm-hmm. In 19 and 20, they were not nearly as good as they were in previous years. Trevor masked a lot of that.
Sure did.
Offensively. Their defense has still been pretty good in recent years, but their 2020 defense wasn't very good. But that was more of an anomaly in the year because they were so young. All those kids now were freshmen, and Tyler Davis was banged up all year. And Mike Jones was not suspended. He was out half the time with banged up with injuries. That was just a down year for their defense, and then they picked it back up. I mean, their defense was better last year than their numbers represent, because their offense was so bad. But their offense isn't anywhere close, and it was mass. I mean, look, Tony Elliott was just not a good coordinator. He just wasn't. Him and Jeff Scott, I've said this before, they are not very good apart. They're pretty good together, but they're not very good apart. Yep. And Trevor Lawrence masked a lot of that. A lot of that. 99 Props BK1 says, I'm going to disagree with this comment he made, Ryan. I saw this earlier. Mm-hmm. Clemson's model of success is QB-centric with some elite playmakers around him, as opposed to Georgia, which is overall dominance and depth. Strongly disagree with this sentiment. When Clemson was rolling from 15 to 18, they were a better version of Georgia because their offense was better than Georgia's. Clemson's defense was elite in 2018. I mean, so no, their model is a more explosive version of Clemson, of Georgia, in my opinion. I mean, you look at their 2018 defensive line, people forget that defensive line had 3 first-round draft picks on it. One of them didn't even play in the postseason, and it didn't matter because Dexter Lawrence, remember, got suspended in the postseason that year for, some kind of performance enhancer. Remember? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so they still went out and dominated. They had 4 defensive linemen that year with over 10 tackles for loss. And it might have been more because Dexter Lawrence had 7.5 and didn't play in the postseason. Like that 2018 defense was insane. They gave up 13 points a game. In the postseason that year, so ACC title game and the 2 playoff games against Notre Dame and Alabama, they gave up 29 points. Now, let me make sure you understand that, Ryan. Not 29 points per game. They gave up 29 points in 3 postseason games that year.
Yep.
Georgia gave up 41 in the SEC title game.
Yep.
Right? So, with all due respect, those Clemson teams were absolutely built on balance because they could beat you if their offense played well or poorly, because of how good their defense was. So I'm going to disagree with that a little bit. I think their models are similar, in my opinion.
And even though this team is not nearly as good as the 2018 version, Brian, I mean, we talked about it earlier, right? The defensive line for Clemson, it's got some dudes on it, man. Like you got
their front seven is as good as any team in the country, including Georgia's. The difference is Georgia's way better on the back end.
Agreed. But like Clemson, I mean, to the depth perspective, right, for the defensive line real quick, right? Miles Murphy's going in the first round. Brian Bresee, as long as his health checks out, is going in the first round. Tyler Davis is a really good football player. He'll be drafted at whatever he decides to come out.
As long as the medicals check out.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
KJ Henry, former 5-star recruit, backed up by former 5-star recruit Xavier Thomas, who's a freshman All-American. Oh, and not to mention Justin Maskell was a decent recruit. And we just talked about Rook Oforo, or however you pronounce the kid's last name.
Ro, I think.
Ro, who is also going to get drafted this year. Like that depth is stupid on the Clemson defense line. It's insane.
Well, and let's look at this. Clemson this year has 66 tackles for loss this season. Georgia has 39. Right? Clemson this year has 22 sacks on the season. Georgia has 10. Right? I mean, Georgia's really good. Georgia last year had 49 sacks. Obviously, it was very, very good. Clemson the last year they won the title had 54.
Yep.
Right? So that year Clemson had 136 tackles for loss. Georgia last year had 101. Right? As I said last year, Georgia was really good. They weren't as good as people made them out to be relative to how they would have stacked up against 2019 LSU, 2018 Clemson. They would not have beat those teams. It was a down year in college football. I said it before the season. Was Georgia the best team in college football last year? Yes, they were. You stack that team up against previous teams. I don't think they beat 2019 Ohio State, much less 2019 Clemson or 2019 LSU. 2018, there were 3 teams in the playoff that year that could have beat Georgia. Potentially Oklahoma as well, potentially, just because they could score. So I don't think Georgia is their model's not better than Clemson's, in my opinion. Now, what Georgia has done is recruited better.
Yes.
They have a better, I mean, their in-state talent is significantly better than Clemson's in-state talent. Just the reality of it. And where has a lot of Clemson's best players come from? Where'd their 2 generational quarterbacks come from? Georgia. Right. Well, now that Georgia's ascending, they're going to keep some of those players in town. So I actually think their models are similar. Their scheme is different, but their models of dominance on the defensive line, being able to have really good skill on, Georgia's just tends to focus more on running backs and tight ends, where Clemson was more running back receiver oriented, but similar philosophy. I think they're very similar.
There's a realistic chance that 6 Clemson defensive linemen get drafted in April. 6. There's a realistic opportunity. If Tyler Davis doesn't use any more years of eligibility, he comes out, and things check out medically, they could have at least 5, but they could have 6 guys drafted.
That's the only thing that would keep that from happening is what you just said, the medicals. Because Tyler Davis and Xavier Thomas and Brian Bresee are all going to have medical question marks.
Sure.
That's the only thing that could stop those guys from being drafted. Because, like you said, KJ Henry, would it shock you if he's a late day 2, early day 3 pick?
No. I know the NFL likes KJ Henry. He'll be like a 4th or 5th rounder most likely.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So late, somebody may like him enough to take him in the late 3rd, and otherwise early day 3. That's kind of how it is. So, The
NFL likes Rook too. They like Rook, so he'll get drafted as well.
It's a good player. And eventually, right? He's not done yet.
He's a senior. He's a senior.
But is he a senior out of eligibility though?
Not sure about that one.
Let me see here, because I know he is. Let me see here. What year was he? He was a 2019 kid. So he'll have. So even if he played 4 years, he's got another year left because he was part of the COVID year. If I'm him, I'm coming back next year because I'm going to be the guy next year. But yes, that's what I would do anyway.
Yeah.
But to your point, he's played a lot of football at Clemson, and he may decide to come out. But I think he'd help himself by being the dude next year.
Don't disagree.
David Lowe asked, do y'all think Reese calls the same game as last week? Look, I'm just going to say this, David. I have no clue what Tommy Reese is going to do. I mean, would it shock me if they try to regurgitate the same game plan as last week? Nope. They have already done that multiple times this year, right? I mean, they just tried to regurgitate against Stanford the same game plan we saw against BYU. So would it shock me? No. I'd like to think that that's not going to happen, but I mean, if Ryan, if you can know for a fact what Tom Reese is going to do this weekend, then I'm going to be like, okay, dude, let me know what the lottery numbers are for the big Powerball this weekend, because we're going to all retire together. You know what I'm saying?
I'm going to go back to the future and get the sports almanac, and we'll all be rich. Let's do it.
Yep, there you go. Ryan and David, I'm not trying to be dismissive, man. That's the frustration that we have, is that I don't have a good feel if he's going to do something different. I don't. And I don't have a lot of optimism that he's going to do a whole lot different. I mean, there'll be some wrinkles, sure. There were wrinkles against Stanford. When I say the same plan, he didn't just take the same game plan and just, like the BYU call sheet and did the same thing. But it was basically the same. Same stuff, same looks, minor tweaks. It just wasn't a lot to it. And then he'll always dial up that one big play opportunity when you should be doing that a lot more. You know what I mean? Like double the amount of times you're drawing that stuff up, and take those shots and have faith in your players. So I don't know what he's going to do. So my question is not dismissive of you, David. It's just the frustration of I just don't know what he's going to do. I really don't. Ryan B says recruiting talent Clemson has is up there and surpasses Notre Dame by a noticeable difference. Top 100 recruits left and right. It would be like if our new recruiting class were juniors and seniors. I'm going to somewhat push back on this, and I know that's the perception. And I think if you look at the Notre Dame defense, there's not a lot of top 100 players on there, but Notre Dame's defense has a lot of guys that play like top 100 guys. But you look at the Notre Dame offense compared to the Clemson defense. Clemson's defense has 6 top 100 players in it. Notre Dame has 4. And that's only because the starting quarterback is out. If Tyler Buckner was still playing, it'd be 5. If you look at Clemson's recruiting rankings the last 5 years, they've finished 10th, 5th, 3rd, 10th, and 7th. Notre Dame has finished 7th, 9th, 18th, 15th, and 10th. It's only been 1 year, 2020, when it was significantly better than Notre Dame. Notre Dame had a higher ranking in 2022, 7-10. Clemson was better in 2021, but it was 9-5. It's not a huge difference. 2019, Clemson was 10, Notre Dame was 15, not a big difference. And in 2018, Clemson was 7 and Notre Dame was 10. So it's really not the big recruiting difference that people think it is. Clemson gets more 5 stars. That's the difference. And they've done a good job of evaluating 5 stars. Because a lot of their 5 stars turn out to be really good players.
Yep.
Where other teams are bringing in 5 stars that are 5 stars in name only, basically, because they're not really that kind of guy. Clemson does a pretty good job of that. So yes, they've definitely recruited better than Notre Dame. And I'm pulling this all up from the article that I put out today. But you look at the Clemson secondary, for example. 3 of their 4 guys in the secondary are 4-star players. Notre Dame only has 1 4-star player in the secondary. Would anyone trade Clemson's secondary for Notre Dame's secondary? I sure as heck wouldn't.
No.
So it's just kind of one of those things where it's and in some areas the guys played to their level. But Jeremiah Trotter was the number 37 player in the country. I don't see recognition. That.
Yeah.
I don't see that, right? Defensive line-wise, those guys are dudes, and they've played like dudes. And Xavier Thomas would be a dude if it wasn't for all the injuries. Yep. I mean, he was really good as a freshman. And the only reason he hasn't been a star in college is because of the injuries. So they've done a great job of – and then Row was a 3-star recruit who was the number 745 player in the country. So, again, Isaiah Simmons, star, 5-star player in college, 3-star recruit. That's what makes Clemson good. That's right.
Yep.
Clemson's done a great job of finding those guys as well as the 5 stars. It's not – having Justin Ross and T. Higgins, it's having those 2 guys plus Hunter Renfrow, right? Travis Etienne wasn't a very highly ranked kid coming out of high school. LSU didn't even want him until late in the process. They tried to get him late, and it was too late by that point in time. So they have definitely out-recruited Notre Dame, but I don't think, Ryan, it's to the degree that you think it is. Also partly because Notre Dame has done a really good job with evaluation. Isaiah Foskey is a top 100 player. I graded him out as a 5-star upside guy coming out of high school. He just was raw. He didn't play a lot of defense in high school. But that was always a kid you looked at and said, boy, that guy's got about as much talent as anybody in the country. So is he the same level of player as Miles Murphy when they're at their best? No. Is he pretty close? Yeah.
Very close.
Miles Murphy might be a top 10 pick. Isaiah Foskey may be a top 30 pick. That's pretty close. And so I think Notre Dame's done a pretty good job of identifying those guys, but then you look at the Clemson offensive line and they got several highly ranked guys. They don't play like that. Walker Parks is number 50 player in the country. Does he play like a top 50 guy to you? Nope. To me, Will Putnam was the number 101 player in the country, and Marcus Tate was the number 127 player in the country in his class. Does he play like that to you? Doesn't to me. Notre Dame has arguably the best left tackle in all of college football. He's the only 3-star player on Notre Dame's starting lineup on offense. This is what I'm talking about. Notre Dame's starting lineup on offense has all 4- and 5-star players. The only exception is Joe Alt, who is their second best player and arguably the best left tackle in college football right now.
Probably an All-American this year. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So my point is recruiting rankings don't always determine how good guys are. Notre Dame's offense stinks. There's nothing but 4-star and 5-star kids in their starting lineup. Nothing like it. Nothing but it, but they don't play like it.
I bet you on Clemson's side, because I didn't see this part I did read your article this morning, but I didn't see this part of it. But I bet you Jordan McFadden's probably the lowest ranked recruit of the starting 5, and he is significantly their best offensive lineman. Significantly.
3-star kid, number 819 in the country. I will say this, Blake Miller will be their best lineman next year. Partly because Jordan McFadden – now, because I don't think Jordan McFadden's progressed the way that I hoped that he would. He's still a pretty solid player.
Yeah.
But yes, Blake Miller's going to be a good one. Although I wouldn't mind seeing him move to guard someday because he could be a really good guard. But he's a pretty good right tackle for a freshman. But yes, to your point, Ryan, 150, 101, 127, 208, and then Jordan McFadden at 819. Their backup tight end, Jake Brenningstool, really good player. 4-star kid, number 61 in the country. Their starting tight end, Davis Allen, 3-star, number 807.
Yep.
Right? So, it's about finding good players, and Notre Dame has done a pretty good job. I mean, Houston Griffiths doesn't start for Notre Dame. He's a top 100 recruit coming out of high school. Right? Their best safety was ranked number 1,005 in Brandon Joseph. So, yeah, I look at Clemson's receivers. Those guys aren't playing like top 100 players. They all were, but they're not playing like. Other than Antonio Williams, they're not playing like it. So I mean, DJ Uiagalelei, I can never get that kid's name right. He was a 5-star kid, the number 10 player in the country. He's not that much better than Drew Pine. It's really not. I mean, not that much better as a passer. He brings more value as a runner, but as a passer, he's not that much. I mean, just go look at the numbers. They're very similar. Very similar this season. So, and Drew's best game, in my opinion, is better than DJ's best game this year so far. Because I don't think DJ's had a game where he was as good as Drew was against North Carolina. Would you push back on that? Now, this year, DJ's best game of his career was 2 years ago against Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. Oh no, I know. Yeah, I would have to go. I would have to go watch a couple more games this year to have a full opinion. But yeah, I don't agree off the top of my head. I mean, I don't disagree off the top of my head.
Yeah. I'm gonna pull up his numbers here real quick. Again, he's a better talent than Drew. I'm just making the point that the production does not equal. And the kid got benched against Syracuse.
Yeah.
Let's see. He had 370. No, I'll take that back. DJ was pretty good against Wake Forest. He was pretty good that game.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was probably slightly better than Drew's game against North Carolina. Slightly better. Not definitely better. I'd say slightly better. Because he averaged, 9 yards, because, again, threw 41 times, 371 yards, 9.0 yards per attempt. Drew against North Carolina was 70.6%, 289 yards, 3 touchdowns, 8.5 per attempt. Did you know Drew Pine? I didn't realize this. Drew Pine had 9.4 yards per attempt against BYU. That's a really good number.
I did not know that.
That's a really good number. He completed 78.6% of his passes. So if that kid shows up on Saturday, Notre Dame wins. I wholeheartedly, I don't think Clemson can beat him.
Not going to push back on that at all.
I just don't have a lot of hope right now that kid's going to show up. But if he does, yeah. Somebody said this TCU is going to fold. I mean, how many weeks have people been saying that? So here's an interesting question, Ryan, from Irish Blooded. Larger margin of victory this week, Tennessee versus Georgia or Notre Dame versus Clemson? So not necessarily who wins, but will the winner of which game will have the large? I think that the larger margin it'll depend on who wins.
Yeah.
And here's what I mean: if Tennessee beats Georgia, it'll be a blowout.
Think so? I don't think they have
if they win. If they win,
it's
like I said. What did I say to you before the Syracuse game on Saturday? If it's a close game, Notre Dame will lose. But if Notre Dame plays their game, they'll win convincingly. It's the same thing. If Tennessee wins the game, it's going to be because Georgia's having a hard time stopping their pass game. And that's going to put Georgia in a track meet, and Georgia is not a team that can win in a track meet, and it won't be close. If Tennessee can't move the ball and they're not able to score because they're not able to throw the ball, then I think Georgia's going to win, but Georgia would win in a close game. You know what I mean? That's my thoughts. That's how I think the game is going to go down.
Interesting.
Because it's at Georgia.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true in the Notre Dame game. If Clemson beats Notre Dame, I think it's going to be a close ball game. If Notre Dame beats Clemson, I don't think it's going to be a close, like a 3-4 point game. I think Notre Dame will, because if Notre Dame plays like they did, and when they don't play well, like they have at home, like if the issue Notre Dame has is a home versus away problem, not a good team versus bad team problem, and Notre Dame plays like they have all year at home, they won't win. They will, and it might even be. Actually, I'll say this: I think there's a better chance that either team wins convincingly in the Notre Dame Clemson game than the Tennessee Georgia game. And
I can get on board with that. I can get on board with that. Yeah.
But if Notre Dame plays, like I said, if Drew Pine plays like he did against North Carolina, I don't think Clemson can stop them. I don't, because Notre Dame will be able to use their weapons and give Clemson no problems. And I don't think Clemson's offense isn't as good as North Carolina's.
No.
Right? I mean, again, Notre Dame's not going to score 45 against Clemson. I mean, the only way they score 45 against Clemson is if, like, Tyree takes a kickback or they block a punt for a touchdown and they have a pick six and, you know, they have another turnover that they recovered to 12. You know what I mean? Like, they're not scoring 45 on Clemson unless they do stuff like that. They're just not. Clemson's too good. Their defense is too good. But I just feel like if Notre Dame plays like they have at home all year, Clemson will win and win soundly, like 10 points. But if Notre Dame plays like they have, you know, did against Carolina offensively, I think Notre Dame could win by 10 points. I mean, because Notre Dame was on the verge of blowing Clemson out in 2020, and still, what happened? They started sitting on the dang ball again. You had a 10-point lead, and Brian Kelly, let's sit on the ball and let Clemson get back into the game, right? And they had multiple chances to go up big on Clemson in that game, and they didn't take advantage of it, right? Because they were up, 13-3 at one point in time, and then just sat on the ball. And then the defense gets them back up by 10, and then they sit on the ball. But when they were aggressive and were throwing downhill, Clemson couldn't stop them. And I think Notre Dame has more weapons on offense this year than they did 2 years ago. The difference is his quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the difference. Ian was like, I was no Ian Book supporter, right? But Ian Book was way better than what we've seen from Drew Pine the last 3 games anyway.
No doubt.
You got to get him back to being what he was those first 2 starts away from home. You got to get him back to that. Let's see. We got some more down here. Thomas Bent asks, Ryan, has Notre Dame played a front 7 like Clemson's?
I
would say yes. As good? No. Like? Yes. Ohio State's got a very good front 7.
Yeah.
Is it as good as Clemson's? I don't think so. And I definitely didn't think so then. Yeah. Ohio State's been much better on defense this year than I thought. Not great, but definitely better. I'm sorry, Ryan. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, in Ohio State's defensive line has really started to play really good football, especially during the stretch of the season. Now, like, JT just had a crazy game last game, and Zach Harrison apparently has been playing really good football. I haven't gotten eyes on him, but apparently he's been playing really good football. So, I mean, Ohio State recruits defense
has 1 sack.
Pretty good.
I mean,
I know.
The hype that people put on Zach Harrison amazes me. Dude has 1 sack. He's an edge rusher with 1 sack, you know, and he's got 2 tackles for loss. I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
Artie's been playing good football. I don't know. Okay. Haven't watched. Just the word on the street. Word on the street.
I've watched a lot of Ohio State this year, and at no point in time have I been like, man, Zach Harrison's really playing better. No, it's not the case. Their linebacker play has been the biggest thing for me.
Yeah.
Their linebacker play. Tommy Eichenberg has turned into a dude. So their second leading tackler, Steel Chambers, has 44 tackles, total tackles this year.
Mm-hmm.
Tommy Eichenberg has 43 solo tackles this year, Ryan.
It's wild, man.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Matter of fact, puts him tied for 22nd, but let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of the guys ahead of him have played more games.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's doing. Actually, I should probably I can't. That's total per game. I can't do that. That won't work. So anyway, do you know? Hey, do you know who the leading tackler in the country is right now?
I think I do.
Trivia question for you. Who?
Jason Henderson from Old Dominion.
Well done,
sir.
Ryan. That's why you get paid the big bucks.
Oh yeah,
there
man.
You go.
I know all my Old Dominion facts.
There you go. Arrow 5.20 I'm not sure if this has been addressed, but have you discussed the weather forecast for this weekend? Obviously, things can change, but it's looking rainy and windy. So, having lived in Indiana for the better part of a decade, I never pay attention to weather on a Wednesday, because it'll change. 2 days ago, it was low chance of rain, going to be in the sunny, hardly any wind. Now they're talking about it's going to be rainy and windy. On Friday, it may look different. So I'll tell you what, I will talk about the weather on Friday when we're 24 hours away from the game. Until then, honestly, with this area, because of the lake effect and all that, like, you think it's going to be nice, and then all of a sudden some stream changes direction or hits or something like that, and all of a sudden, bam, it's just looks like garbage. So I am not going to pay a whole lot of attention to that, honestly, until we get closer to Friday. So yep. So that's why we haven't talked about it, except when asked. If you guys ask and you guys want to talk about it, feel free. We're not going to ignore it. I mean, this is now the second weather related question we've addressed. It's just not going to be something we discuss.
You know what we should do? We should add a podcast as the IB Nation Weather Report show.
Weather Report. I mean, that would be something to maybe include more into the game predictions shows now that the weather is getting a little bit dicier, so.
Yep.
I just wish it was colder. I mean, that's my only. It's like it's going to be 64 is what it says right now, but we'll see. Irish Blooded said, as a 5-star quarterback, would you rather see a national championship run, or would you rather develop into a first-round QB in the NFL and get paid? I mean, my whole thing is I don't want to go somewhere that lets me do both.
Right.
But if I can only do one, honestly, I'm going to go to the place that's going to make me be a first-round pick and get the – because you say, first-round pick and get paid. I mean, if you're a competitor, it's not only about that, but Patrick Mahomes lost a ton of games in college.
Mm-hmm.
But he developed into a first-round pick, and now he has a Super Bowl ring. So he's been a champ.
I don't think they ever had a winning record with Patrick Mahomes, right? Weren't they like 5-7 every year or something?
Yeah, I don't believe they did.
Yeah.
But he got developed into a first-round pick, and now not only getting paid – but he's also winning.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing too, I would rather be a top 10 NFL pick that wins a Super Bowl. I mean, John Elway never played on great teams. He had one team at Stanford, I think, that had a winning record. Actually, I'm going to look that up now because I think that's correct. I'm going to look that up because I'm going to see here. So what years – I'm trying to remember who it was. I thought Wiggins was the coach. Was it Paul Wiggins? Was that the coach at
I'm not sure
Stanford
about that.
back then?
Not sure.
Let's see here. I'm gonna find that out. So let's see. I know Jack Elway was a coach at Stanford for a while. So let me just find this here real quick. All right. So who was the coach before Jack Elway took over at Stanford? So who would have been the coach there? John Elway missed Bill Walsh by 2 years.
It's crazy.
Bill Walsh was there in 70 and 78. So, yeah, it was Paul Wiggin, not Paul Wiggins, Paul Wiggin. So, John Elway was 6-5, 5-4-7, and 5-6 in his 3 years at Stanford. Would you trade that and the number one pick in the draft and a long career in Denver with 2 Super Bowls for going to UCLA where maybe they would have been better, but he doesn't develop the same way? I wouldn't.
No.
Because what's the whole – if you take football out of the equation, isn't every kid that goes to college that has a brain going because he's actually trying to go somewhere that's going to give him the best opportunity to be successful in life beyond college? Right? It's like the idiots are the ones who say, I'm going to go to this school. Why? Because it's a great party school. Okay, so you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars so you can go drink yourself into oblivion. You're an idiot, right? Like stay home and like go to a community college or go to a trade school and be an alcoholic on a lot cheaper dime. You know what I mean? Like that's dumb. Smart people go to college to somewhere that's going to give them the best chance to then take the skills they learned and go be successful in life. I mean, why are football players different? You know, like every kid should, and you see linemen do this all the time. You know, yeah, this team may be a better program, but that's the best offensive line coach in the game, and he's going to make me the best player I can be for the next level. What's wrong with that? Right. And there's plenty of places you can do both. You know?
So what you're saying is don't go to West Virginia. Got it.
Definitely don't go to West Virginia. Yeah. Definitely go to West Virginia. There's no doubt about that. Unless they're the only team that'll basically take you at that point in time. Ray Salsa 1. You think Clemson is vulnerable to jet sweeps, double reverses, trick plays? Is this a game to do that? And no. I think if you're going to hurt them with stuff, I mean, jet sweeps maybe. I mean, I think you can catch them in like a down block where you can seal off the linebackers and maybe get them outside because I don't think their corners are great tacklers. You know, but a jet sweep is a quick hitter. You know, the thing is their kids are pretty smart. This is not a bunch of idiots that are just athletic. These are smart, good, instinctive football players. You know, and they can run. That's a bad combination for a double reverse because Barrett Carter, even if he's a step late reacting, him and Trenton Simpson have the kind of speed that they can still tackle you for a loss.
They're stupid athletes, man. That linebacker, absolutely crazy tracking ability.
I think any trick plays you're going to do are going to try to be things where you try to catch them into pressure with a tunnel screen behind it, or stuff where you're going to try to beat them down the field. Double moves, post-snap switches, you know, ISO routes off play action where you get the safety to bite down and beat them over the top. That's the stuff you're going to beat them with. It's not going to be the gimmicky plays because those things work like once. Right. And you're not beating Clemson because that one thing. You're going to beat them because you consistently executed and move the ball and beat them that way. That's going to be the key.
Yeah. You want to beat Clemson, take advantage of their speed, right? So their speed into aggressiveness. Throwing a screen against speed and aggressiveness works sometimes. Running a reverse against speed and aggressiveness usually doesn't work out too well, right? Because they're going to work to the perimeter pretty well.
Because if you have a good tendency, you know, hey, look, we studied their film on 3rd and 2 against this look, you know, a 3-by-1, you know, 2-by-2, 12 personnel. We know they're going to bring this pressure, and we think we can catch them on a screen, right? And you're taking advantage of their speed, and that is because they're so aggressive with it. Like you said, reverses are not And I don't consider jet sweeps to be gimmicks or tricks.
No, it's part of an
outside
offense.
zone play it's just part of who you are.
Yeah.
So, but the other stuff, Ray, it's a good question, but this isn't a team that I think is good for that.
I also feel like they're not blitzing as much as they have in years past either. So,
Nope, they're not. Ryan Logan, if Notre Dame ends up pulling this out against Clemson and then beats USC, and they finish the season with their losses to Ohio State, Marshall, and Stanford, what's the taste left in your mouth from the season? It's going to be a little bit of both for me, Ryan. I'm going to be disappointed that they weren't the team that they should have been. But Sean and I talked about this the other day, but I'm still going to go into the offseason with a lot of excitement because, yes, there were some bumps in the road that should not have happened. They're not excuses. There's no justifying it. I'm not one of those, well, I'm glad it happened because it made me stronger. No, I'd rather be stronger because things did go well for me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to give any examples. You guys understand what I'm saying. But the point is I would still rather have won those games and learned those lessons and been 11-1 in a playoff team. However, I'm going to still go into the offseason with a lot of optimism because for them to run the table, a lot of things are going to have to go well that make me think, number one, the hardest thing for a young coach to do is things to not go well. A 36-year-old head coach doesn't get a head coaching job because a lot of bad things happen to him in his life. You know what I mean? Like he's proven himself. He's on a much faster track than most people, right? It's going to tell me that despite at the biggest pressure-packed job in America with no experience, stuff hit the fan and you figured it out and you got your team on a good path and you beat some really good football teams. That's going to tell me a lot about Marcus Freeman's learning curve, and it's going to be a quick one. And it's going to send me to this offseason thinking this team's got a chance to be pretty good. And if they can hit a couple recruiting things here and a portal kid here or there, well, this team goes into next year with a chance to be something.
Yes.
Because next year's schedule in some ways sets up better because you're going to have Clemson on the road next year and Ohio State at home. And Clemson to me is going to be more beatable next year on the road than Ohio State is going to be on the road. So like if I had to pick one of those teams to play on the road next year, it'd be Clemson because like I know that Ohio State's going to lose some dudes and they're going to lose CJ Stroud. But I'm a big fan of Kyle McCord. You know that, Ryan. And Kyle McCord's going to be throwing to dudes because, hey, Marvin Harrison and Emeka couldn't go pro if they wanted to. Right. You know what I mean? Like they're true sophomores. They're not going anywhere.
Yep.
And your stud recruiting class you just landed are going to be sophomores next year, and you're bringing in another stud recruiting class of receivers next year. Like you're going to have some offensive linemen to replace. That's going to be the question mark for Ohio State. Because I would imagine
Travion Henderson will be back too because he can't go pro either.
And you had Evan Pryor will be back from the knee injury he suffered earlier in the year. He'll be back.
Yep.
And Dallas Hayden will be a sophomore. The question is going to be the line. Can the line get better? That's going to be a question mark. But anyway, the point is Ohio State's going to be a better team than Clemson next year, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so I'd rather have it next year set up Clemson on the road, Notre Dame at home, or Ohio State at home than having to go to Ohio State next year. And look, Notre Dame's played at Clemson, and they, that's an environment that Notre Dame was able to play relatively well in and almost won against a pretty good Clemson team. So that's a more winnable environment for me than Columbus, in my opinion.
Well, and to Ryan's question, for me, it's like a short-term versus long-term thing. It's like, we talked about this, right? 9-3 after how you started, not too bad, but I mean, at the end of it, it's still not good enough. It's still not nearly good enough, right? So it's not the season isn't a success, but to the long-term aspect, wow, you beat Clemson and USC down the stretch. You may have figured something out a little bit, right? And you have a lot of guys coming back next year. That's interesting. So I feel good about the long-term. Short-term is still not viewed as a success.
The season will not be considered a success.
Ever.
No.
Yeah. Right.
Nothing you could do now would change. The only thing that could change that is if there was just insane upsets and Notre Dame somehow gets into the playoff because everybody lost 3 or more games and they win a title. I mean, that would be the only, you know what I mean? But that's not going to happen.
Right.
But it's one thing to look at a season and say, you know what? It didn't go the way you wanted to, but man, this team has got some momentum and he showed this. And now let's see what he does this offseason. So I'm not excited about looking back on the season, but I'm really excited about looking forward.
Yes.
That's the thing. Because, again, I'd rather not have learned this lesson. I would have rather not have ever learned this lesson. I would have rather Marcus Freeman just kept this thing rolling and build on it. But if they finish well, it's going to tell me that Marcus Freeman – I'm going to learn some things about Marcus Freeman that we didn't know because of the circumstance. And the only way they run the table means he did some really good things to get this team out of a really bad place with a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, a lot of different if he's able to unify all that, it tells me he's got what it takes. So 100%. My optimism moving forward be exciting. But there's nothing that can happen from here on out that's going to make me be okay with losing to Marshall and Stanford. Nothing.
Yep.
Nothing.
Agreed.
Now, here's what I'll say too. If I could say to you, Ryan, you before the year, you have a choice. Notre Dame's going to go 9-3 this year. That's going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. But here's the option that you do have. I'm the football god. I'm giving you this ability to choose how it's going to go. Notre Dame is going to start off with some really ugly losses. They're going to lose to Ohio State. They're going to lose to Marshall, lose to Stanford. And at one point in time, they're going to be 3-3 and things are going to be looking bad. But you're going to finish the year with a blowout, with a win over Clemson and a win over USC, and you're going to go into a bowl game and you're going to win a bowl game. You're going to go 10-3. Or Notre Dame's going to go 9-3 and they're going to lose to Ohio State, Clemson, and USC.
That's option one.
100%.
It's no brainer because then you would feel like it's the same old, right? Like there's no progress. And the second thing, you could be like, not only was there progress from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, you also beat a couple highly ranked teams. So like that's different. You'd have beaten
probably 3 by the end of the year because I think North Carolina is going to be ranked in the top 20. Right? I mean, so you'd have 3 wins over ranked opponents. The last time Brian Kelly did that was 2017. I mean, so yeah, that's huge. That'd be huge. So that would be, I would take that in a heart. And if Syracuse stays ranked, you could have a chance at the end of the year to have as many ranked wins this year as Brian Kelly had the last 3 years combined.
Yeah.
So the point is that it shows that, hey, you know what, because I know they're not going to keep losing to Marshall and Stanford in the future, but I still wouldn't know if they can beat the good teams in the second scenario.
Yes.
Right. So yes, I dig that one. I'm with you on that, Ryan. That's a good answer. 10 Day says, who thought Clemson was going to be this good with all the new hires Dabo hired? I'm actually impressed. I'm not impressed yet, 10 Day, because I don't know who on the schedule up to this point in time was supposed to have beat them.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing is, like, I think this weekend will tell us this. Like, let's chat about this after this weekend, 10 Day, because I look at the schedule and they play Georgia Tech, far inferior team, Furman, Louisiana Tech, far inferior teams, NC State at home, that should be a win, Boston College on the road, Florida State on the road. Florida State on the road, that's a quality win. Syracuse at home. I mean, other than maybe at Wake Forest, and again, let's be honest, the talent differential between Clemson and Wake Forest is still enormous.
Right.
They needed overtime to get that one. I don't know if this staff, and that's kind of part of the reason that I think if Notre Dame plays their game, they're going to win, because I haven't been impressed with Brandon Streeter or Wes Goodwin so far this year, Ryan. I mean, I don't. You may feel differently, but Clemson's won just because they're a very fundamentally sound team for the most part. Dabo has them ready to play every week, and they have way better. If you think they've out-recruited Notre Dame, start stacking up their recruiting against Wake Forest and NC State and Florida State in recent years and Syracuse. It's not even close.
No.
So I get what you're saying, 10 Day, but I'm not shocked that they're undefeated right now. At worst, I thought they'd be 7-1 right now. The question is the finish. I expected Miami to be better. I was curious to see how that game was going to go. But the Notre Dame game, to me, is going to be the tell-all for how good Clemson is. If they come into Notre Dame Stadium and kick Notre Dame's butt, I'm like, okay, yeah, he made some good hires. So far, I just haven't been overly impressed with.
Especially with Wes Goodwin. I feel like Streeter's done some good things, but like Goodwin,
Streeter's solid. That's it. Well, I'll say this. Streeter's better than Tony Elliott was the last couple of
years.
No
doubt. I mean, they're definitely better than they were last year offensively. No doubt.
That's a low bar.
Right.
I've never seen a coach regress as much as Tony Elliott did as a play designer and play caller.
And
it's very strange.
It's still getting worse, sir. And it's still getting worse.
Very strange.
Yeah.
Leopard Ions. Do you think there's a certain amount of passing yards we need to get the W Saturday? Thanks for all you and the boys do to keep us updated. Well, you are very welcome. And there's another question that we have that's similar to this from Christopher Galloway. Brian, what are the numbers in the wide receiver room for this game? Could we push the tempo against Clemson? So I'll kind of take these kind of two questions back to back, Ryan. Let's start with Leopard Irons question. Do you think there's a certain amount of passing yards we need? For me, Ryan, I'd say no.
I don't think there's a number. No.
There's a scenario in which Notre Dame could pass for 130 yards and win. And it's very similar to what we saw in 2017 against USC. Brandon Wimbush went 9 of 20 for 120 yards. But the reason that game was a blowout was because of his arm. And that is because he hit EQ on a post route early for a touchdown, and he hit Kevin Stepherson for a back shoulder early down the field. And when he proved that I can beat you down the field, there was nothing USC could do. Now, this is a better defense, but the point is, if Drew goes, 8 of 11 for 130 yards, but it's because they, 100 of them came in the first quarter as Notre Dame jumped out to a big lead, sure. Yeah. If I were to be more realistic, I'd want to see Drew, I think I'd probably like closer to 200 would make me feel better, a little over 200. But the key is going to be Leopard Irons. He's going to have to be really good on third down, and he's going to have to hit a couple shots early. He doesn't have to throw for 1,000,000 yards if he does those things. He's got to do something to say, hey, if you guys are going to do this, then we're going to beat you down the field. We just are. And so to me, it's not even about total yards or total completions. It's can efficiency. You hit a couple big shots early and be good on third down? That's going to be the key. To your point, right? Efficiency with just a couple big plays in the pass game to make Clemson respect you. He doesn't need to throw for 350 yards in this game, to your point. He doesn't. Yeah.
I mean, because there's a reality where this is a dogfight, right? Where this is a low-scoring affair where you have two good defenses and two offenses that can be a little one-dimensional at times, right? Like that's a reality that could happen. So I don't think there's a number just because I could see a world where Notre Dame is able to put up some decent numbers and Drew Pine's efficient enough, but I see another one where Notre Dame's in a dogfight. Like I just I don't think there's a number. I really don't. I think it's about, to your point, being efficient. You have to be more efficient than you've been the last 3 weeks. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. And then Christopher Galloway with kind of a similar question. Brian, what are the numbers in the wide receiver room for this game? Could we push the tempo on Clemson? I would push the tempo a little bit on them, yeah. And they're a bigger D-line. I'd want to kind of get them moving a little bit, kind of get them on their – because here's the tempo against a team like Clemson also puts them on their heels a little bit, right? Like once Wake Forest's tempo kind of got to Clemson didn't have any answers. I mean, second half, Clemson had no defensive answers, Ryan, none. And I don't want to give Wes Goodwin a lot of time to thinking about what he's going to do. I would definitely come out early and try to push the tempo. I think it would take a lot of pressure off Drew Pine because it's funny. I said before that everything's just going too fast for Drew Pine. And so I had somebody ask me, well, then why do you want them to go tempo? I said, because speeding up the tempo actually slows down the game for the quarterback because you have a lot fewer decisions. It's here's my read, get it and go.
Less thinking.
And so it may seem contradictory, but it's not when you understand that the too fast is there's just so many things. Like I've got to make a full field read, and so I'm just going really fast. Like that's what I mean by it's going too fast for him. What I'm looking at is like, hey, I got one read. This is my read. If that kind of thing. And so I do think tempo could be good for him. And the answer to the receiver room is the same thing as the answer to the previous question. I don't need the receivers to catch 20 balls for 300 yards this game. If the receivers only catch 6 passes for 100 yards in this game, that's impactful for me because there's going to have to be some big plays in there. You know what I mean? Like if Tobias Merriweather only catches 2 passes for 60 yards, that's great. Yep. Because it means you got a couple big plays and now Clemson has to adjust accordingly, that kind of thing. Now, obviously, if, they go off and catch 20 balls for 300 yards, that's great. Notre Dame will win by a bunch. You know what I mean? It's just not needed, in my opinion, against this Clemson team, in my opinion, if the defense plays well. Now, the defense could play like crap and you need to score. But this is not 2018 Clemson. This is not 2020 with Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne Clemson. You don't need to you don't have to win in a shootout. At least you shouldn't if your defense plays well, in my opinion. That's my 2 cents. I think Ryan agrees. Truman Dumel is Will Shipley better than our running back triplets and be as unbiased as possible? He picked Clemson Tigers over Notre Dame. Truman, I'll be honest with you, I'm always unbiased. Will Shipley individually is better than any running back that Notre Dame has, in my opinion. Is Will Shipley better than Notre Dame's trio? No. And I said this when they signed him. Logan Diggs is not that far behind Will Shipley. Neither is Audric Estime, neither is Chris Tyree. I think the reason I take Will Shipley is he has the combination of all of it. And none of the Notre Dame backs have that. He's got elusiveness like Logan Diggs. He's got some power like Audric Estime, just not as in big of a package. And he can be a weapon in the pass game like Chris Tyree. The difference is comparing him to Logan Diggs is he's more explosive than Logan. Yep. Like definitely more explosive than Logan and Audric. And he's a more natural runner than Chris Tyree. So individually, no question about it. If you were to ask me this, would you trade Will Shipley and Phil Maffa for Notre Dame's backs? That's the question, Ryan. I know my answer. I'm going to present that to you right now. If Clemson came in the office and said, hey, we will trade you Will Shipley and Will Maffa for your 3 running backs, would you take that trade?
I would not. Would not it's because we talked about it before, right? I mean, Notre Dame's 3 running backs, when you kind of take everything that they do well and use it in a committee approach, like you have everything you need in a running back room. Like it is a really well-balanced and well put together running back room. I mean, there may have been a miss, obviously, with a Will Shipley if you're Notre Dame, but I mean, Lance Taylor also got some dudes in there, right? Like they got some nice pieces in that running back room, and it's a really nice mixture. And, Phil Maffa is a solid football player, but I mean, the drop off from 1 to 2 is a lot more drastic than Notre Dame's 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. Like you have, and that's not even counting the fact that, hey, still have Jadarian Price coming back, from injury eventually. And The running backs that you're going to keep adding, like Notre Dame's running back room, I'm not sure I would change it for
it's gonna be
anybody.
Nuts. Yeah, it's going to be nuts. It's going to be nuts.
Oh,
and there's
next
a nice
year
blend
when
of
Love and them
skills.
get there, it's crazy, man.
A really nice blend of skills too, Ryan. A very nice mix-up of skills. It's not just like a bunch of the same dudes, to your point. But again, if you were to say, could I have Will Shipley for one Notre Dame back and I'd still have two of the others?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, then we're having a conversation. And I'm not going to pick a guy, but I think individually, I do think Will Shipley's the best individual back right now of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Could that change next year? Sure. So, and that's how I've always felt. I've never said, oh, Logan Diggs is better than Will Shipley anyway. What I said on signing day was, I'll take those two over that one.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in today's era, 20 years ago, you get the best individual back. Games changed. And so, that's where and if you look at it, look at the combined production of these guys in recent games. It's pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive. But yeah, Will Shipley's a very good football player. You've never heard me. Like last year's, a lot of Notre Dame fans were like, oh, Will Shipley's not that good. Look at his number. Like, have you seen what that kid's running behind? You know what I mean? Like, it's only his production was only because of how good he was. Because their line last year couldn't run block to save their life, Ryan.
They were terrible.
They were terrible.
Yeah.
And he was able to make some stuff happen. Now he's got to protect the ball a little bit better. Mm-hmm. That's why he's got that. That's the one thing him and Aldrich have in common. Will put it on the ground a little bit. And fortunately, he hasn't lost any, but he'll have a bad drop. He'll have something like that. But other than that, Will Shipley's a really good football player. There's no doubt about it. And we've got some more questions down here. I want to get to some more. Here we go. Derek Duvall, do you think the end of the half in Syracuse game was a sign of Notre Dame not sitting on the ball, moving forward, and understanding the urgency of not letting the foot off the gas? 100%.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember the sequence of events. Didn't Marcus Freeman call a timeout when Syracuse had the ball?
Believe so.
If I remember correctly, when Syracuse had the ball late, Marcus Freeman called a timeout to ensure that his offense would have more time when they did get the ball. So I'm going to go back and look that up, Ryan, because I believe I'm correct on that. So just give me a second to look that up. Let me see here. I got the game book here. So yes, late in the first half, boy, this my computer is just really ticking me off today. All right, so late in the first half, let's get that drive. It was the last drive for Clemson, a full drive of Clemson in the second quarter. So let's see here. All right. Yes, Syracuse ran up the middle. They passed on first down, stopped the clock, passed on second down to stop the clock at the Notre Dame 42-yard line. So they were in Notre Dame territory. Then on 3rd and 10, they ran a quick run play. And then I remember that some Syracuse fans were booing. And you and I talked about this, but what they didn't understand is Syracuse was in 2-down territory. They were at the Notre Dame 42-yard line. They were trying to pop a run, get 5 or 6 yards, put them in a 4th and manageable situation. When they ran that and only got 3 yards, Marcus Freeman immediately called a timeout with a minute 26 left. And then Syracuse went for it on 4th down. Notre Dame stopped them because then he knew they're either going to punt it right now or they're going to go for it on 4th down. And if we get a stop or either way, the clock's going to end either way unless they get a first down. So it's a money down on defense, but it's going to give our offense a chance to get points. And so I thought that showed me that he's thinking about we need to get more points. I loved that. Loved that sequence of events.
Syracuse probably should have punted it too, looking back on it. But yeah.
I'm okay with it because you're not going to beat Notre Dame by playing it safe. I mean, I get that they were lucky to be down 14-7 because at the time, Ryan, I felt the same way you did. I was like, they should have punted it and just, you were lucky to be down 14-7. But now looking back, it's like, I don't think they would have been able to, play safe and beat Notre Dame. That's my thing. That's my thing. So, we'll see. We'll see. It's always easy to say that when it doesn't work out.
Sure.
But I think there's merit to what you're saying, Ryan, but I just feel like I'm often going to try not to be critical of a coach if he's being aggressive. I'd rather you err on the side of being aggressive than conservative when you're, the other team's just better than you. So let's see here. let's get to some more. We got a couple more things, and then we're going to get out of here. Ryan Archer, 452, B Ryan. What are your hottest takes for the last 4 weeks of the season across college football? 4 hottest takes.
I mean, your one is that Alabama's going to lose again, right? Like that was one of yours, I think. Man, hottest takes. I mean, if I'm staying with Notre Dame, I guess them going 3-1 or 4-0 would be hot to a lot of non-Notre Dame people, right?
Well, I think what a hot take is that Notre Dame absolutely has a chance to go 4-0, which some people may think is nuts, but I think they absolutely have a chance to go 4-0.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think USC is that much better than North Carolina. Really don't.
Yeah, I don't either.
I think they're better, but not that much better. I don't. I think a hot take for me is that Georgia's going to – I think that Tennessee's going to beat Georgia this weekend. That's my hot take. You remember – no, it was Sean Davis. I told Sean Davis last year. So I think Tennessee can move the ball on Georgia. Right? I think they can throw the ball on them. And early on, Tennessee did. And then they had a bunch of receiver injuries, and then another guy got hurt in that game. And
their first drive against Georgia last year was surgical, man. Like Hendon Hooker tore them apart the first drive.
Yeah. And then it just became the Hendon Hooker versus everybody else. And when they had the injuries, and it's just like it wasn't going to work. But, I don't love this Georgia secondary. You know what I mean? I don't think Georgia's really good at getting the pressure on the quarterback. And Nolan Smith is out for the year now.
Yep.
So and they weren't very good at putting pressure on the quarterback anyway. I don't love this Georgia team. They're really good, and they deserve to be number 3 based on what they've done, and they're the defending champs, but they're vulnerable. And this Tennessee team is playing at a different level right now. I mean, they're just playing at a different level of confidence than anybody else. And so my hot take is I think that if they were going to stub their toe, we'd have seen it. It's kind of like with TCU. Oh, TCU's going to come back down to earth. I think that happened a couple games ago, if that was going to happen. I really do. Hot take for me, I mean, other than that, I don't know. I guess I'm not really like a hot take kind of guy. I mean, like, I think what I just said is fair. I mean, if they can go on the road and destroy LSU and beat Alabama, then I think they can beat anybody. So the interesting thing is I do think we're going to see an LSU-Tennessee rematch, or Alabama-Tennessee rematch. And I think Alabama's going to win the rematch because it's hard to beat a team twice.
I was about to say it's hard to beat a team twice. Yeah. It's really hard.
Yeah.
It almost never happens. Never happens.
Yeah. And so you almost kind of want to be the team that plays second. You want to be the one that in the postseason, you're the team that lost. So I think that's maybe another hot take. I mean, do you have any Big Ten hot takes, Ryan? Like,
Big Ten stinks.
I mean, Illinois beat Michigan. I mean, I don't know. I don't think they can. I don't think they have enough offense to beat Michigan. I really don't. I mean, if I'm going to go Tommy DeVito against JJ McCarthy, I'm going to take,
Maybe if they put Arthur Sikowski in, it might be a little different.
Yeah. Here's a hot take for you. Ohio State will beat Michigan by at least 17 points.
Think so? That much?
Wow.
Wow. I think it's going to be a close game. Game.
I don't. I think Ohio State's going to win convincingly over Michigan.
I'll definitely take Ohio State in the game, but I actually think it's going to be a pretty competitive game.
Okay. Trying to think of some other potential hot takes. I mean, here's a hot take for you. Syracuse, North Carolina is going to win the ACC this year.
I can see that.
I think here's why I say that. I think Clemson's going to win their division. I think North Carolina is a nightmare matchup for Clemson. We've seen this before. Remember was it 2014 or 2015 when they played Carolina in the ACC title game?
Or Marquise Williams. Marquise
Williams, yeah. And this is a more talented group of skilled players than they had then. And I don't think Clemson is quite Clemson can score on North Carolina. Don't get me wrong. But I think North Carolina, because I don't think Clemson's as good in the secondary as Notre Dame is. I don't. And the thing is can Clemson dominate enough in the pass game like Notre Dame did to pass rush to do that? Yes, they can. But I really think North Carolina can score on Clemson. So, yeah, that'd be a hot take. And again, is that my prediction? No, but it's a hot take, right? Isn't a hot take supposed to be kind of outlandish, right?
A little bit
like, yeah. So if I was going to do a hot take, that would be one. Now, like I said, Driscoll's predicting the North Carolina is going to win the ACC. It's a hot take, right? That would be a hot take. Colton Simpson says, I think Audric is much better than most think. If he didn't split so many touches, I think he would be a top 5 back in the nation. You want to take that one, Ryan? Share your thoughts on that.
I love Audric Estime. Yeah, everyone knows I do. I do think that
you take the first shot because you've been higher on him than I am.
I think that he's better player a part of a committee approach than a singular approach, right? Because I think that for me, he's not super dynamic player, right? Like he is a incredible downhill runner, very powerful. When you have other guys in the committee that do different things, I think that Audric is an absolute stud in that role that he plays. But top 5 nationally, I mean, you're putting him up there with guys like Bijan Robinson and that type of back. I don't think he's that, but I think that he's a really good back and a really good stable committee approach type of back. But I don't know if he does enough all around to be considered a top 5 national back. Like that's very elite status. That's very high.
I don't even think he's the best back on their team. I mean, if you talk about all around back, he's the best pure runner on the team.
Mm-hmm.
I think Logan Diggs is a better all around player than Audric is. I mean, that's my thing. And I like Audric, but you do like him more than I think they're both very good players.
Yeah.
But again, I think his game has got to mature a little bit before I'm going to put him in the same league as some of the top backs in the country. I mean, look, love Audric, love Logan Diggs. And you say, well, they both outplayed Sean Tucker. Well, statistically, sure. But Sean Tucker was running behind the Syracuse offensive line against the Notre Dame defensive line.
Right.
You put Sean Tucker in the Notre Dame offensive line with a better play caller, and Sean Tucker's a monster. Sean Tucker's leading the nation in rushing this year.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Bijan. If you put Bijan Robinson on this Notre Dame team with this offensive line, I mean, he's going off.
Bijan's a different dude, man. He's a different dude.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Chase Brown, that's a dude. I think that's probably the Zach Charbonnet behind this offensive line would look a lot like he does for them. Mohamed Ibrahim running behind this offensive line would be a flat out dude. So, I think Audric's a very good football player. A very good football player. I was going to say Blake Corum, but Tommy Rees has already shown he has no clue how to use a guy like Blake Corum this year.
Yeah, or Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So I get what you're saying, Colton, and I don't think you're wrong in that Audric's better than some people think. I think a lot of Notre Dame fans are high on Audric, though. I think there's a lot of people that think what Colton thinks, to be honest with you.
Oh, people call him Jerome Bettis 2.0 all the time. 100%.
So could he get there to where he's a top 5 back? Sure, he could.
Possible.
But I just think, number one, I think he's always should split carries because Audric, for some reason, if you notice, Ryan, I think part of the reason they use him the way they do is because I don't know if he is at the position yet where he can be a 4-quarter guy, because he seems to kind of wear out a little bit. And sometimes guys who are super muscular don't have the same conditioning level as other guys. And I wonder if that's maybe why they kind of wait to really use him until the second half.
Right.
Because they can measure that stuff now with everything in practice, with the RP, the GPS and all that kind of stuff. They can be like, this kid really fades late in practice. Okay. So don't start his clock until later. You know what I mean? And I think that's a big reason why they've done the way they've played the way they do with him.
And
I do.
I also think that in order to be a top 5 national running back, and I mentioned this a little bit, but those guys affect the game in so many different ways. Like it's like Bijan, they put Bijan down the seam and throw him jump balls, like they throw him catch point passes. Like Bijan affects the running game, the passing game. He can block. I mean, even Jahmyr Gibbs is like an all-around weapon, right? Like you can use him in so many different ways. For me, those elite guys are guys that affect the game in all facets, not just one, right? Because I think as a downhill runner, as a guy that's just going to, wear away at a defense, Audric could be a top 5 back in that capacity potentially in the country. But is he ever going to be a top 5 all-around running back? I think that's the disconnect I have.
Right. I'm with you on that. All right, we got a couple more here. Some questions popping up late. Austin Schaumburg asks, how close was Notre Dame to landing Will Shipley? Very close. I mean, they were to the point where they were considered his leader for a long time. I think at the end of the day, he just didn't want to go far away from home. I think distance was if Notre Dame was the same distance away from his home in North Carolina as North Carolina was, I think he goes to Notre Dame. I do. So it was very close. Clemson did a really nice job recruiting him. Here's a good one from KL, Ryan. What's the playoff scenario like for the loser of Georgia, Tennessee? I think Tennessee has a better chance of recovering from a loss than Georgia does. And here's why I say that. If Georgia loses to Tennessee, what's the win they're hanging their hat on for a playoff resume? Their resume is not overly impressive. Yeah. Oregon, right? I mean, you're going to go back.
Oregon's playing pretty good ball now, but
right.
Yeah.
But you're going to go back to week 1, whereas Tennessee can say, "Hey, we beat Alabama."
Sure.
Right. So what would have to happen is for Georgia is they would if they lose this game. I mean, let's say they lose this game and then Bama beats Tennessee. You've got 2 SEC teams with a better resume than you do. Because Alabama would have a win over Tennessee, and they'd be the SEC champs. That's their data point. Tennessee could say, "Hey, we beat Georgia and Alabama," right? So they would already have a win over you. Plus, they would have a win over Bama. Bama needed a rematch to get them. So if you're going to take 2 SEC teams, you're not taking Georgia. Right. I think Tennessee can lose, and things can play out where they can say, "Hey, look, Bama's got a loss. Georgia is undefeated, and then we're sitting there with 1 loss. Well, we beat Alabama head to head, right? We were just in a better division. They would be able to then be the second team. I don't think Georgia can be the second team in the SEC. I think they can only be the top team in the SEC. You know what I mean? Like meaning like with a regular season loss. Now, if they go 12-0 and then lose a barn burner to Bama in the title game, then they could be the second team. I'm talking about with a loss. That's what I'm referring to. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think Tennessee can. Plus, it's at if the roles were reversed and it was at Georgia or Tennessee, I could say maybe a little bit, but again, Tennessee has several games they can hang their hat on to point to and say, "Hey, look, we beat Bama, we beat Georgia," right? If they were to win that game, if Georgia loses this game, I'll ask again. I don't know what the win that they're hanging their hat on is, and you'd have to go all the way back to week 1 against Oregon.
Yep.
Other than that, here's who else they will have beaten if they lose to Tennessee: Samford, South Carolina, Kent State, Missouri, Auburn, Vanderbilt, Florida, Mississippi State, Kentucky, and Georgia Tech. They will have 1 win over a ranked opponent. You don't win your conference championship and you've got 1 win over a ranked opponent. You're not much better than what Notre Dame was last year, resume-wise, if we're being honest. Right? So I think Georgia needs this game more than Tennessee does for the playoff. Do you agree with that or disagree with that, Ryan?
No, I agree with that. And that you laid it out like that because, I mean, again, I talked when we got into the show about resumes matter, right? So you don't have any wins to hang your hat on. It's just like a hollow resume at that point. So agree?
Because to me, you look at Tennessee, they'd have two wins to hang their hat on. Because the 40-13 win at LSU is more impressive to me than beating basically Oregon in the first game of their new coach in your backyard. They were both blowouts. So that's where I'd go with that. So yes, I agree
especially with how LSU has trended, in a better spot now. So
for sure. Next question from Brandon Pietz. Brian and Ryan, where do you think the disconnect is for the offense? Is it more of Drew Pine issue, or is it Tommy being a little too conservative in moments and predictable? Take this.
The answer is yes, man. The answer is yes. I mean, Brandon, if you've listened to the show, you know that I'm not usually one side too far in the other, right? Like I think it's always a mixture. Like I don't think it's usually one thing that's the issue. Is there an issue with Tommy at times not calling a great game? Yes. Is there an issue of him at times being too conservative? Absolutely. No doubt about it. Has Drew Pine been playing good football? Nope, he is not. So what's the issue? It's all the issue. Like it's everything, like it's never, I don't think it's ever one thing. I'm a guy that likes to believe it's never as bad as you think. It's never as good as you think. Like it's usually somewhere in the middle. And in this common grounds, I also think that it's a combination of everything. I truly do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you there. I think a lot of it has to do with Tommy Rees, though. I am going to put more of it on his shoulders, not all of it, because he's the head of the offense, right? I mean, he is the quarterback's coach. He's the guy whose position group has not really played well all year. He is the guy that puts together unnecessarily generic game plans, refuses to play certain guys, all those type of things. I mean, I am going to put it at his feet because he's the boss, right? I mean, it's no different than what I've ever done in the past. If a defensive coordinator is not doing well, guess whose fault that is? The head coach. You hired him and you allowed him to continue to be your defensive coordinator. So, but it's not like only on him as if like everyone else did their job phenomenally except for him.
Right.
It's just that the other things that don't go well would still fall at his feet because he is the boss. I mean, look, he's the one that wanted complete autonomy in the offense. You can't want complete autonomy, get complete autonomy, and then say, well, but it's not really my fault. I mean, he'd take all the credit, rightfully so, if things were cooking right now, then I'd be like, man, Tommy Rees is doing a phenomenal job. Dude's doing a great job. Like, we'd be hyping up Tommy Rees, no doubt. Because, again, it's his offense. It eventually falls at his feet. If he had Drew Pine, if Drew Pine played every game like he has against North Carolina, BYU, we'd be talking about Tommy Rees. This cat needs to be in the Broyles watch list conversation. He took the backup quarterback and turned him into this, and they beat Stanford, and that'd be the conversation we'd be having. This is my point. If he did play like that, and the offense was humming the way it should be, they beat Stanford. Notre Dame's definitely in the top 25 right now if they beat Stanford, right? Then if they beat Clemson and then USC because the offense is playing great, I mean, he took a backup quarterback and team that lost 2 straight games start season, and they rolled. That's great coaching, right? Well, the opposite is true. He's held the unit back. And so yeah, I mean, I put a lot of it to it. I think it's not even what I would say is it goes a lot deeper than conservative and predictable. It just goes back to an overall lack of faith in your players, a lack of humility, a lack of just understanding how the game works at this level. You know what I mean? Like, you're trying to be too much of an NFL team and not enough of a college team, and I think it's all of that stuff kind of all ties together, and it leads to, like, to me, the conservative and the predictability is a byproduct of a deeper problem. That's what I would say.
That's fair.
And so that's kind of where I'm at. And if those things change, then this team can get rolling. That's the kind of exciting thing. Tom Spagnolo, thank you, Tom. As we know, our offensive line struggled last year. Do you think A-gap Tommy is doing those types of runs because he doesn't think they can stretch or outside runs? I don't know. If he does think that, that'd be a really unwise thing to do. Think.
Yep.
Very unwise, because this is a different unit. It's a different coach group. It's a more talented group than last year because they got the right guys on the field. It's a much more well-coached unit. It's a much better unit. There's no question. And so if he's only running A-gaps all the time because he doesn't think they can run stretch or outside runs, then he's not coaching right. He's not practicing right. He's not prepping right. He's not teaching right. He's not calling it right.
Also, to make everything very predictable, that also doesn't help your offensive line. It doesn't. I mean, that's I understand the thought process, Tom, because it's like, okay, if our offensive line blocks, let's just say duo really well, like we're just going to block duo all the time, but also defensive coordinators are smart, right? Like they know you're running duo all the time, which means they'll do other things to counteract that and make it not as effective, right? Like so there's a little bit of a disconnect there. There's a slight disconnect because I think that if Tommy was trying a couple different things, then that would actually make the offensive line better because then it wasn't be as predictable as far as what the offensive game plan is, what the structure is. It would just change things up a little bit.
Last couple from KL. What is your Pac-12 hot take, Ryan?
I don't know if I have one.
My Pac-12 hot take would be that UCLA is going to win the Pac-12.
That's a good one.
They got rid of divisions. So if UCLA is, to me, UCLA, Utah, USC, and Oregon, I believe, all somewhat control their own destiny. Because the Pac-12 was kind of doing the Big 12 model. They got rid of divisions, so it's just the 2 best teams.
Yep.
If UCLA wins out, they're playing in the Pac-12 title game because they will have eliminated USC and they will have eliminated Utah because Utah would only potentially have 1 loss in that scenario. Actually, no.
So that's 2, right?
Well, but one of their losses was a non-conference loss. They lost to Florida.
Yep.
So, but Utah would have had to beat Oregon, which would give Oregon 1 loss. So, like, it would be like, so if Utah doesn't beat Oregon and Utah's out, UCLA beats USC, they're out, and it's just Oregon and UCLA. Even if Oregon loses a game, Oregon can lose a game and still play because they haven't lost a conference game yet, right? They're undefeated in the conference, so they have more of a buffer, especially since they won head-to-head against them. So in that scenario, it kind of goes back to the Tennessee-Alabama thing. In a rematch, I think UCLA wins. So that's just kind of how I think. Now, last year proved differently, right? Utah beat Oregon twice. That was a bad matchup, really bad matchup. And Oregon was playing terrible football down the stretch. So different scenarios. So that would be my hot take, is that UCLA wins the Pac-12 Again, I'm not predicting it, but I'm saying that's the hottest take. Like if I were to say, USC is going to win it, nobody would find that to be an overly hot take, right? I mean, they have the best quarterback in the Pac-12. If I were to say, hey, Oregon's going to win the Pac-12, is that a hot take for anybody?
No.
I think my hot take just for Ryan would be Bo Nix is going to be the Pac-12 Player of the Year.
Don't do that. Don't do that, please.
I'm just saying.
Don't do that.
I'm just saying. I know you want to hate on him, but the kid continues to play well. I'm just saying. Who's the number 1 ranked passer in the Pac-12 right now, Ryan?
I don't know. I guess it's Bo Nix, since you're asking me like that.
Bo Nix, 169.71 passer rating right now. It's averaging 277.6 yards per game, 20 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. It's completing 72.3% of his passes. So
here's my hot take. At the end of the season,
11 rushing touchdowns.
Here's my hot take. At the end of the season, Bo Nix will only be the 4th rated passer in the Pac-12. There's my hot take.
That's not a hot take. That's a personal vendetta.
No, it's not.
And I don't know if Patrick Nix did something to you or something like that, and so you're taking it out on his kid. But no, I mean, look, here's the problem with Bo Nix. In all seriousness. Because of what he did at Auburn, you're just constantly waiting on that shoe to drop.
It's going to happen.
And I get it. You keep saying that, but it keeps not happening. That's my point. So we'll see if it does. But the point is, the kid has played very well. Whatever you think of what might happen, the last 7-8 games, he's been excellent.
The only game I remember is Georgia. So
okay, that's because of a personal vendetta. That's not real analysis. It's not real analysis. It's not grown-up analysis. That's a personal vendetta. I just think it's hilarious that you will go to the mattresses for Jeff Sims, who's very mediocre college player, but you will give Bo Nix credit for nothing, which I think is just kind of like, what did he do to hurt you, Ryan? What did he do to you? I want to know.
He got overrated by a lot of people very quickly. That's what he did.
Totally agree with that. He got very overrated by people. I remember wasn't his first start against against Oregon?
I want to say you're right.
Right.
That sounds correct.
What was it? 2019, correct?
Yes.
And he led them to that. He was terrible. This is what bothered me. He was terrible for 3.5 quarters.
Yeah.
If you remember correctly. But then he led them on a game-winning drive at the end, and then the hype machine took over. He went 13 of 31. 41.9% completions for 177 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. He was part of the reason they were losing. But he had a great drive at the end of the game, and they won the game. And there was they ignored all the bad and then just hyped up the last drive. 5-star freshman and all that kind of stuff.
I remember he was the freshman of the year in the SEC over Derek Stingley as a freshman too, and I was just like, no. That didn't happen.
That was all about the hype and the reputation. And let's ignore the fact that he went 11 of 27 and a touchdown and 3 picks against Florida. Yeah. My thing to you, however, is I think you're kind of dealing with a little bit of Tim Tebow-itis, in that people that will bang on Tim Tebow as a pro or even as a college player because they didn't like how he was hyped up, and that's totally fair. I get that. And Bo Nix, last year, I mean, he was playing pretty good football until he got hurt. He was playing the best football of his career in the last 4 games, right? And this year he's been pretty good. It's just, I think the thing is, but you're hearing the Bo Nix hype again. And it's like flashbacks to the freshman year. But the reality is, you got to admit, Ryan, the kid's been really good the last 8 years.
My most disappointing thing about Bo Nix is that he still has a year of eligibility if he wants to go back. Just want him to go away.
Just go away, man.
That's just go away.
That's not cool. That's petty.
Go to the CFL. I don't want to see you anymore, sir.
That's petty. I enjoy watching the kid play. I mean, why would I hate on a kid that's, averaging almost 300 yards a game passing and has 400 rushing yards and 11 touchdowns? The kid's fun to watch. The hype about him, it's annoying, but the kid's fun to watch. Here's a good question from Caleb Collins, Ryan. How did Josh Heupel get Tennessee turned around so quick? And here's the deal. What is not a good answer is transfer portal.
Well, that's a part of it, though.
No. What I'm saying is that's not the answer.
Right.
You've got to coach these kids up, right? Like you've got to pick the right kids in the portal and coach these kids up, because like when they got a transfer portal quarterback, everybody thought the transfer portal quarterback that was going to save them was Joe Milton.
Yeah.
Not Hendon Hooker. He's developed Hendon Hooker into a great player. And that's my thing is I think it's lazy to just say, transfer portal. Well, there's a lot of people that have gone to transfer portal that look, USC went to the transfer portal for much higher ranked players than Tennessee has, and they don't look like what Tennessee looks like. That's what I'm saying. But yes, the portal allowed them to bring in the tools to be as good as they are, but it requires a lot more than just portal.
Well, and
that's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, no, well, to my point, I was going to say is that you made a great evaluation or identification to find Hendon Hooker. Like that was, he fits exactly what you want to do offensively. From Josh Heupel's baseline, he's a really good offensive guy, right? So there was already offensive talent in that room. Like Cedric Tillman was already there. Jalen Hyatt was already there. Those guys were already on campus. Jamari Small was already there. You had a couple offensive linemen that were already there. So you have a good offensive system that you brought in. You had the guys buy into it. You hit the proverbial, the bell on getting a Hendon Hooker in there, and you've coached them up, and it's been effective, obviously. So I think that you had some existing pieces that were already there that you have accentuated and made better players, and you hit on a transfer quarterback that is a perfect fit for what you want to do schematically. Perfect fit.
And here's another thing too, Ryan, that I think needs to be acknowledged as well before we get out of here. I think he's made really good hires.
Yes.
I think he's put together a really good coaching staff of guys that know how to coach and are just college coaches. Yes, they can recruit, but these guys can coach. You got to give them credit for that. It's not just about talent. This team plays, they're well coached, they don't beat themselves, they're schemed great. And here's the biggest thing. On top of the scheme, he has taught them as a staff, the whole staff, they coach these kids on how to play. They execute their scheme as well as any team in the country right now. You're talking about a quarterback that over the last 2 years, Ryan, this is nuts, right? Over the last 2 years, Hendon Hooker has thrown, 21 games. He has thrown 52 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and he's got another 9 rushing touchdowns. So he has 61 touchdowns and 4 interceptions in less than 2 seasons.
Seems
that
good.
Is nuts.
Seems good.
Like he's not being talked. Like if he was a 5-star recruit that went to Bama, the hype that would be around him right now would be insane. That's all you think Tim Tebow hype was bad? Imagine if Hendon Hooker was like a 5-star recruit that went right to Alabama and did what he's doing now.
Yep.
Right? As much as I love Bryce Young, these numbers blow away what Bryce Young has done in a similar stretch. Right? He has been unreal since putting starting lineup. And, great quarterback play is going to go a long way in college football. Mm-hmm. But no one thought he was going to be this when he came, is my point. He got developed into this.
Yep.
And I always thought that Hendon Hooker was better than what is Justin Fuente thinking? He never – But I thought he'd be a good ACC quarterback, not anything like you know what I mean? Like I thought Tyler Eifert was
potential
really
first round pick.
High school. I never saw him being what he was. Right? There's levels of I knew the kid was going to be good. I know he was going to be. I thought Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was going to be good. I gave him I think a 4.5-star upside grade. I didn't see him developing into the Butkus Award winner. You know what I mean? And that's how I feel about Hendon Hooker. So that's my 2 cents. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Man, we got one super chat real quick from Christopher Moore. If weather is a factor Saturday, who will benefit the most, Notre Dame or Clemson? Keep up the great work, fellas. Christopher, we talked about this a little bit earlier. I think it slightly benefits Notre Dame, number one, because they're the home team, and number two, I think they're less dependent on the pass game than Clemson is. So it doesn't help. It hurts both teams, but I think it hurts Notre Dame slightly less. I just don't know if it'll be enough to really impact the game either way, is my 2 cents. So thank you for getting that super chat in at the end, Christopher. We really appreciate it. Appreciate all the great questions. This show was 3.5 hours long. It did not feel like it. Although now I feel my behind's a little bit numb right now. But great show today, everybody. Enjoyed the discussion with you, Ryan, and great questions. So many good questions. Great discussion in the chat. I like that flag Ryan's got. You know, you can buy that, everybody, in the merch store, which you can find the link to below. Hit that like button, everybody. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Check out our website. All of our articles are free at irishbreakdown.com. And, of course, we will see you tomorrow, 1 o'clock Eastern, for the Irish Breakdown podcast. Have a good one.